A millionaire walks into a simple bakery and is moved. The scent of the attendant brings back childhood memories. Between the warm bread and the sweet smell, he feels his mother there, and he discovers that destiny had prepared something greater. What do you think is going to happen in this story? Leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Chapter 1. The Empty Penthouse. The Manhattan skyline sparkled like scattered diamonds against the night sky, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell Reed's penthouse. At 43, Maxwell had accomplished what most could only dream of. Founder and CEO of Reed Innovations, a tech empire valued at billions. Tonight, like many others, he stood alone at the window, a glass of 18-year-old scotch in hand, watching the city pulse beneath him. Another successful quarter. "Mr. Reed," Diana, his assistant, had said earlier that day as she handed him the financial reports. "The board is thrilled." Maxwell had merely nodded, his expression revealing nothing of the hollowness that had been growing inside him for years. What was the point of acquiring more when he already had everything? His reflection stared back at him from the window, designer suit, perfectly trimmed salt and pepper hair, the picture of success. Yet his eyes told a different story. He took a sip of his scotch, savoring the burn as it traveled down his throat. His phone buzzed for the 12th time that evening. Probably Vanessa, the model he'd been seeing casually for the past 3 months. Or perhaps it was Lawrence, his VP of operations, with some crisis that needed immediate attention. Maxwell didn't check. Instead, he placed the glass down on the marble countertop of his kitchen island and made a decision that surprised even himself. 5 minutes later, he was in the private elevator, heading to the underground garage, wearing jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater, clothes he rarely wore. The security guard looked up, startled to see him dressed so casually. "Everything all right, Mr. Reed?" "Fine, Tom, just heading out for a drive." "At 10 p.m., sir? There's a storm coming in." Maxwell gave him a rare smile. Sometimes a storm is exactly what you need. In the garage, he bypassed his collection of luxury vehicles and headed straight for the one car no one expected him to drive. A classic 1967 Mustang, midnight blue, restored to perfection. It had been his father's, the only inheritance from a man who'd worked 60-hour weeks at an auto factory in Detroit, only to succumb to a heart attack before retirement. Maxwell slid into the driver's seat, feeling the worn leather beneath his fingertips. He hadn't driven this car in years, yet it felt more like home than the penthouse 30 floors above. The engine roared to life and something shifted inside him, a small crack in the dam he'd built around his emotions. Without planning a destination, Maxwell pulled onto the street, merging with late-night Manhattan traffic. His phone continued to buzz in his pocket. After 10 minutes, he rolled down the window, extracted the device and turned it off completely, before tossing it onto the passenger seat. For the first time in decades, Maxwell Reed was unreachable. He drove through the Lincoln Tunnel into New Jersey, then kept going. North, always north, as if some invisible force was pulling him. The rain started halfway through Connecticut, pounding against the windshield in heavy sheets. Maxwell didn't stop. He drove through the night, watching the cityscape transform into suburbs, then into rolling countryside. By dawn, he had crossed into Vermont. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp autumn morning. Trees painted in fiery reds and golds lined the winding country roads. Maxwell rolled down his window, breathing in air that smelled of earth and pine instead of exhaust and expensive cologne. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been on a road with no particular destination. Every minute of his life was scheduled, optimized for maximum productivity. Even his vacations were strategic. Networking opportunities at exclusive resorts, maintaining connections with other power players. Around 9 in the morning, he spotted a sign for a town called Mapleton. Population 2,143. On impulse, he took the exit. The road narrowed, winding through a forest before opening onto a main street straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Brick buildings with colorful awnings, American flags hanging from lampposts, and actual cobblestones beneath his tires. Maxwell parked the Mustang in front of what appeared to be the town square, a green space with a white gazebo at its center. He stepped out, stretching his stiff muscles. 20 hours of driving had left him exhausted, but somehow more awake than he'd felt in years. The scent hit him first. Warm, yeasty, sweet. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. Following the aroma, Maxwell found himself standing in front of a small bakery with a weathered wooden sign, Collins Family Bakery, Estia 1946. The windows displayed an array of pastries and breads that looked nothing like the meticulously crafted, often flavorless confections served at Manhattan's elite establishments. These were rustic, generous in size, and judging by the line of locals inside, popular. Maxwell pushed open the door, triggering a small bell. The warmth enveloped him immediately, not just the physical heat from the ovens, but something more intangible. Conversations flowed between customers and staff. An elderly man at the counter was discussing fishing conditions, with the teenage boy handing him a bag of bread. In the corner, two women with coffee cups laughed over some shared joke. "Be right with you." The voice came from behind the counter, where a woman was arranging pastries in a display case. She straightened up, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, and Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten the sensation. Genuine surprise. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and eyes the color of amber. Not conventionally beautiful by Manhattan standards, no cosmetic enhancements, no designer clothes, just a simple blue t-shirt under her apron. Yet there was something about her that made it impossible for Maxwell to look away. "First time in Mapleton?" she asked, her smile revealing a slight dimple in her right cheek. Maxwell nodded, suddenly aware of his unshaven face and rumpled clothes. "Is it that obvious?" "Small town," she said with a shrug. "We know all the regulars and most of the summer people. Plus, that's a New York license plate on that beautiful Mustang, and you have that city look about you." "City look?" She gestured vaguely at him. "Like you're waiting for something to happen." "Everything moves slower here." Her gaze softened. "You look like you've been driving all night. Coffee?" Before he could answer, she was already pouring a mug from a carafe behind her. "Black? Or do you take it with cream and sugar?" "Black is fine," Maxwell said, accepting the mug. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt an unexpected jolt that had nothing to do with the coffee's temperature. "I'm Olivia Collins," she said. "Everyone calls me Liv." "Max," he replied, instinctively using the shortened version of his name that he hadn't gone by since college. Maxwell Reed. If she recognized his name, and most people in business circles would, she didn't show it. Instead, she pointed to a glass case filled with pastries. "Hungry, Max?" "The cinnamon rolls are fresh out of the oven. Family recipe, 5 generations old." Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a cinnamon roll. His nutritionist would have a fit. He nodded, and Liv selected the largest one from the tray, placing it on a simple white plate. "You can take a seat anywhere," she said. "It's after the morning rush." Maxwell chose a small table by the window, watching as Mapleton slowly came to life. Across the street, a man was arranging pumpkins outside what appeared to be a general store. 2 doors down, a woman swept the sidewalk in front of a bookshop. The first bite of the cinnamon roll nearly undid him. It was nothing like the precisely measured, scientifically perfected pastries created by the celebrity chef who supplied his office. This was chaotic, messy, with uneven swirls of cinnamon and pockets of brown sugar that had caramelized at different rates. It was imperfect and utterly delicious. As he ate, Maxwell noticed a familiar scent that wasn't coming from the baked goods. It was subtle, floral with notes of vanilla, a perfume that triggered something deep in his memory. His mother had worn something similar, he realized, before she left when he was 8, before his father buried himself in work and bourbon, before Maxwell learned that the only person he could truly rely on was himself. "How is it?" Liv had appeared beside his table, refilling his coffee without asking. "It's Maxwell searched for a word that wouldn't sound condescending. "Delightful, quaint." "It's perfect," he said finally, with unexpected sincerity. She smiled, and for a brief moment, Maxwell Reed, the man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, felt strangely nervous. "So, Max from New York with the midnight blue Mustang," Liv said, leaning against the edge of the table. "What brings you to Mapleton?" "We're not exactly on the tourist trail." Maxwell couldn't very well tell her the truth, that he'd driven through the night in some sort of midlife crisis, fleeing from a life that looked perfect on paper, but felt increasingly meaningless. He settled for a partial truth. "Just driving. Needed to clear my head." Liv studied him for a moment, as if seeing beyond his carefully constructed facade. "Must be some head," she said finally. "Mapleton is a 5-hour drive from Manhattan." Before Maxwell could respond, The bell above the door jingled and a small whirlwind burst into the bakery. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with the same amber eyes as Liv and a mop of unruly brown hair. "Mom!" Ms. Abernathy let us out early because Tyler got sick all over the reading corner, and it was gross but cool at the same time. "And can I have a cookie?" "Hi!" This last word was directed at Maxwell, the boy noticing him mid-sentence. "Inside voice Ethan," Liv said, but her tone was warm. "And no cookie until after lunch. This is Mr. Reed. He's visiting from New York." "Whoa, really? I saw New York in a movie once. There were like 1 million people and buildings taller than clouds and taxis everywhere." Ethan's eyes widened. "Do you live in a building taller than clouds?" "Ethan Collins." "Give the man some space," Liv scolded gently. But Maxwell found himself smiling. A genuine smile. Not the practiced one he used for business photographs. "It does feel like 1 million people sometimes," he said to the boy. "And yes, my apartment is pretty high up. You can see most of the city from my windows." Chapter 2, Unexpected Connections. "That is so cool." Ethan bounced on his toes, his excitement palpable. "Can you see the Empire State Building? Do you have a telescope? Have you ever seen Spider-Man?" Maxwell couldn't help but chuckle at the boy's enthusiasm. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him without an agenda, or the careful deference that came with his position. "Ethan, homework first," Liv said, ruffling her son's hair. "Your backpack is in the office. Mrs. Gunderson will be here in 10 minutes to take you home." The boy's shoulders slumped dramatically. "But Mom, we have a visitor from New York. And Mr. Reed probably has plans that don't include being interrogated by a 6-year-old, Liv replied with a gentle smile. "Go on now." Ethan sighed with the profound disappointment only children can muster before turning to Maxwell. "Will you still be here tomorrow? I have so many questions about New York." Before Maxwell could answer, Liv interjected, "Ethan, Mr. Reed is just passing through." She gave Maxwell an apologetic look. "Sorry about that. He's curious about everything." "No need to apologize," Maxwell said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "And actually, I don't have any specific plans." The words felt foreign in his mouth. Maxwell Reed always had plans, always had a schedule, always had somewhere important to be. But right now, the only thing that felt important was another cup of this excellent coffee and the warm atmosphere of this small-town bakery. Liv raised an eyebrow. "No hotel reservation?" "Mapleton Inn books up fast, even this time of year." "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Maxwell admitted. The truth was, he hadn't thought at all. The drive had been impulsive, completely out of character for a man whose life ran according to 15-minute increments on a meticulously maintained digital calendar. Something in Liv's expression shifted, concern, perhaps, or curiosity. "Well, there's the inn on Maple Street, though Nancy charges tourist rates. Or the Pines Motel on the edge of town is decent enough if you're not too picky." A woman in her 60s, with silver hair and bright blue reading glasses perched on her nose, approached the counter. "Morning, Liv, the usual, please." "Coming right up, Mrs. Henderson." Liv turned back to Maxwell. "Duty calls. Take your time with your coffee. No rush." As she moved away, Maxwell found himself watching her interactions with her customers. Each person was greeted by name, often accompanied by a question about a spouse, a grandchild, or some local event. This wasn't the practiced charm he was accustomed to in high-end New York establishments, where staff were trained to make wealthy patrons feel important. This was genuine connection. After finishing his coffee, Maxwell approached the counter to pay. Liv was packaging a large order of pastries, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "What do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. $5.50 for the roll and coffee," she replied, not looking up from her task. Maxwell pulled out a 20. "Keep the change." Now she did look up, her expression unimpressed. "We don't do that here. Coffee and a roll is $5.50. Not 6, not 20. Taken aback, Maxwell found himself fumbling for exact change, something he couldn't remember doing in years. As he sorted through his wallet, Liv continued, "If you're staying in town and want to be generous, better ways to do it than overpaying for breakfast. Volunteer at the community center, buy a round at Harvey's for the locals, or donate to the library renovation fund. Money's nice, but time and genuine interest go further in Mapleton." Maxwell handed her a 5 and a 1, accepting the 2 quarters she gave him in return. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, unsure whether to feel chastised or intrigued by her directness. Outside, the autumn air had warmed slightly, though a crisp breeze rustled the leaves of a massive oak tree in the town square. Maxwell stood on the sidewalk. suddenly uncertain. He should get back on the road. Return to New York. There were meetings scheduled for tomorrow, contracts to review, decisions that supposedly couldn't be made without him. Instead, he found himself walking toward the Mustang, retrieving his phone from the passenger seat and powering it on. Immediately, the device exploded with notifications: 37 missed calls, 112 text messages, 241 emails. The digital representation of a life that demanded his constant attention. Maxwell scrolled through the messages. Diana's were increasingly concerned. "Where are you?" "Board meeting in 10. Did you forget about the Jensen acquisition call?" "Maxwell, everyone is looking for you. Please respond ASAP." And finally, "I've told everyone you're battling a severe case of food poisoning. Take whatever time you need, but please let me know you're alive." He typed a quick response: "I'm fine. Taking a few personal days. Handle things there. We'll check in later." Maxwell hesitated, then turned the phone off again and returned it to the car. He felt a strange lightness, as if he'd set down a heavy burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. The Mapleton Inn, as it turned out, was a charming Victorian house painted a cheerful yellow, with a wide front porch dotted with rocking chairs. The proprietor, Nancy Winters, was a talkative woman in her 70s, who made no attempt to hide her curiosity about the New Yorker with the classic car. "Business or pleasure, Mr. Reed?" she asked as she handed him an actual metal key attached to a wooden tag labeled Room 3. "Neither, really," Maxwell replied. "Just passing through." Nancy nodded, clearly not believing him. "Well, breakfast is served from 7 to 9. Wi-Fi password is on the card in your room, and if you need anything, just holler. Dinner's not included, but Colin's Bakery does sandwiches at lunch. Harvey's Pub has decent burgers, and Lucia's Italian is the best food in town if you're looking for something more upscale." Maxwell thanked her and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Room 3 was nothing like the luxury hotel suites he was accustomed to. No marble bathroom, no automated curtains, no tablet controlling the room's amenities. Instead, there was a queen-sized bed with a handmade quilt, a solid oak dresser, and windows that actually opened to let in the breeze. The bathroom was small but spotless, with a clawfoot tub instead of a rainfall shower. It was charming, quaint, and should have felt like a significant downgrade from his usual accommodations. Instead, as Maxwell set his overnight bag on the bed, thankfully, he kept a travel kit in the Mustang for emergencies. He felt that same strange lightness again. After a shower and a change into the spare clothes from his bag, Maxwell decided to explore the town. Mapleton's Main Street was only 6 blocks long, lined with small businesses: a hardware store, a bookshop, a family-owned pharmacy, a craft store selling local artisans' work. No chain stores, no luxury brands, nothing that would be familiar to his usual world. As he walked, Maxwell noticed something else. People acknowledged each other. Not the careful avoidance of eye contact that was standard in Manhattan, but actual nods, smiles, brief conversations. 3 different strangers said hello to him as he passed, as if his presence on the sidewalk was reason enough for a greeting. Around noon, he found himself back at Colin's Bakery. The lunch crowd had formed a line that extended out the door. Maxwell joined it, listening to the conversations around him. Talk of a fall festival next weekend. Complaints about someone named Turner, who hadn't fixed the Johnsons' roof properly. Debate about whether the high school football team had a chance at regionals this year. When he reached the counter, Liv looked up from making a sandwich, recognition flickering across her face. "You're still in town," she observed, neither pleased nor displeased, simply stating a fact. "Room 3 at the Mapleton Inn," Maxwell confirmed. "Nancy sends her regards." "I bet she does," Liv said with a small smile, along with a dozen questions about the mysterious man from New York, no doubt. She was surprisingly restrained, only asked if it was business or pleasure. "And is it?" Liv asked, her hands continuing to work as she spoke, assembling what appeared to be a turkey sandwich with practiced efficiency. Maxwell considered the question. "Neither, both. I'm not sure yet." He gestured to the menu board above her head. "What do you recommend?" "The smoked ham and Vermont cheddar on sourdough is our most popular. Or the roast beef. With horseradish cream if you like something with more kick." "Ham and cheddar then," Maxwell decided. As Liv prepared his sandwich, Maxwell glanced around the bakery. In daylight, he could better appreciate the space. Exposed brick walls hung with local artwork, solid oak tables worn smooth by decades of use, windows that let in generous amounts of natural light. Behind the counter, through an open doorway, he could see part of the kitchen, where a man in his 60s was shaping bread dough on a floured surface. "That's my dad," Liv said, following his gaze. "Frank Collins, third-generation baker. He's supposedly retired but can't seem to stay away from the dough." "Family business?" Maxwell asked. Liv nodded, wrapping his sandwich in brown paper. "Since 1946. My great-grandfather started it after coming home from the war. It's been in this same location ever since." She handed him the sandwich and rang up his order. $7.25. This time, Maxwell counted out exact change, earning a small nod of approval. As he turned to find a seat, Liv called after him. "Hey, Max from New York?" He turned back. "Yes? The Fall Festival is this weekend. If you're still around, you should check it out. Whole town comes together at the fairgrounds just outside town. Apple cider, pumpkin carving contests, hay rides, the whole Norman Rockwell experience." She shrugged. "Might be worth seeing before you head back to the city." Something warm unfurled in Maxwell's chest at the casual invitation. "I'll consider it," he said, trying to sound non-committal despite the inexplicable pull he felt to say yes immediately. The sandwich was exceptional. Fresh bread with a perfect crust-to-crumb ratio, quality ham that tasted nothing like the processed meat found in chain delis, sharp cheddar that actually tasted of milk and age rather than plastic. Maxwell ate slowly, savoring each bite while watching the rhythm of small-town life through the window. After lunch, he continued exploring, eventually finding himself at the edge of a small lake on the outskirts of town. A wooden dock extended into the water, and without fully intending to, Maxwell found himself walking to the end of it, sitting down with his legs dangling above the water. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Maxwell Reed had absolutely nothing he needed to do. No calls to return, no reports to review, no social obligations to fulfill. The silence was both uncomfortable and exhilarating. The afternoon sun sparkled on the water's surface, and a family of ducks paddled nearby, occasionally dipping beneath the surface. Maxwell watched them, struck by how present he felt in this moment, not thinking about the next meeting or the next deal or the next milestone, just sitting on a dock watching ducks in a small town whose name he hadn't known yesterday. "Penny for your thoughts?" And the voice startled him. Maxwell turned to see an elderly man approaching along the dock, fishing rod in hand. "Probably not worth that much," Maxwell replied. The man chuckled, easing himself down to sit a few feet away. "Name's Walter Green, town handyman, unofficial historian, and mediocre fisherman. Max Reed. The New Yorker with the Mustang. News travels fast here." Walter cast his line into the water with practiced ease. "Nancy says you're just passing through, but most folks who are just passing through don't take rooms at the inn." Maxwell found himself smiling despite the intrusion. "I hadn't planned to stay. It just happened." Walter nodded sagely. "Mapleton has that effect sometimes, especially on folks who look like they need what it's offering." "And what's that?" "Depends on the person." Walter adjusted his grip on the fishing rod. "For some, it's peace and quiet. For others, it's community. For a few, it's a fresh start." He glanced sideways at Maxwell. "What brings a man in expensive shoes to sit alone on a dock in the middle of a weekday?" Maxwell looked down at his Italian leather loafers, now scuffed from walking along dusty country roads, shoes that cost more than what some people in this town probably made in a week. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty of his response surprising him. "I just started driving and ended up here." Walter made a sound that might have been understanding. "Running from something or toward something?" The question hit closer to home than Maxwell was comfortable with. "I'm not running," he said automatically, the denial reflexive. "Sure," Walter agreed easily, clearly not believing him. "Beautiful day for not running anyway." Chapter 3, Roots and Revelations. They sat in companionable silence for a while, Walter occasionally adjusting his line or changing bait, Maxwell letting his thoughts drift with the gentle lapping of water against the dock pilings. The sun began its westward descent, painting the lake's surface with golden hues. "You should try Lucia's for dinner," Walter finally said, reeling in his line. No fish, but he didn't seem disappointed. "Best lasagna north of Boston. Tell Lucia that Walter sent you. Might get you a free glass of wine." With that, the old man gathered his fishing gear and ambled back along the dock, leaving Maxwell alone with the fading afternoon. The suggestion of dinner reminded Maxwell that he hadn't made any plans, a rarity in his meticulously scheduled life. In New York, reservations at the best restaurants were made weeks in advance, often by his assistant who knew his preferences better than he did himself. The thought of Diana brought a twinge of guilt. By now she would be frantically rearranging his calendar, making excuses to important people, perhaps even worried about his well-being. Maxwell pulled out his phone and turned it on long enough to send another message. Still taking personal time. Handle cancellations as needed. Will compensate for any inconvenience. He hesitated, then added, I'm fine. Just needed space. It wasn't much of an explanation, but it was more personal than their usual communications. Back in town, Maxwell found Lucia's Italian restaurant, occupying a renovated Victorian house at the end of Main Street. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. White tablecloths, soft lighting from wrought iron fixtures, the rich aromas of garlic, tomato, and herbs permeating the air. A woman in her 50s with dark hair streaked with silver approached, greeting him with a warm smile. Welcome to Lucia's, just one tonight? Yes, Maxwell confirmed. Walter at the lake suggested I try your lasagna. Said it's the best north of Boston. The woman's face lit up. Ah, you've met our Walter. I'm Lucia herself, and I'll make sure you get our best table. Walter doesn't send us many visitors, so when he does, we pay attention. She led him to a corner table beside a window overlooking a small garden, still showing the last blooms of the season. The lasagna is indeed our specialty, but may I suggest starting with the bruschetta? The tomatoes are from my brother's farm just outside town, last of the season. Maxwell agreed, and soon found himself savoring the simple appetizer. Toasted bread rubbed with garlic, topped with diced tomatoes that burst with flavor, nothing like the hothouse varieties available year-round in New York's gourmet markets. As he ate, Maxwell observed the other diners, a family celebrating what appeared to be a birthday, a couple holding hands across their table, a group of women enjoying what seemed to be a regular girls' night out. Each table told a story of connection, of lives intertwined in the way that only happens in small communities where people truly know one another. When was the last time he'd had dinner with friends just for the pleasure of their company? Maxwell couldn't remember. His meals were networking opportunities, business discussions, or solitary affairs in his penthouse, with a view that impressed everyone but had long since ceased to move him. The lasagna, when it arrived, lived up to Walter's praise, layers of pasta, rich meat sauce and creamy bechamel, with a perfectly brown top of bubbling cheese. Lucia had indeed included a complimentary glass of red wine, a local Vermont vintage that surprised Maxwell with its quality. How is everything? Lucia asked, stopping by his table. Exceptional, Maxwell answered honestly. Walter didn't oversell it. She beamed with pride. Family recipe. My nonna brought it from Sicily in 1923. She studied him for a moment. You're staying at Nancy's Inn, I hear. How long will you be in Mapleton? The question was becoming familiar, and yet Maxwell still had no answer. I'm not sure, he admitted. It wasn't a planned stop. Lucia nodded as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones we don't plan for, especially for people who plan everything else. With that enigmatic comment, she moved on to check on her other customers, leaving Maxwell to wonder if there was a sign on his forehead that read, Type A personality in crisis. After dinner, instead of returning directly to the inn, Maxwell found himself drawn back to the town square. The evening was cool but not cold. The sky clear and scattered with stars, so many more than were visible through New York's light pollution. A few locals strolled around the square or sat on benches, enjoying the peaceful end to the day. Maxwell claimed an empty bench, leaning back to gaze upward. When was the last time he'd looked at the stars? Really looked at them, not just noted their existence while hurrying from one climate-controlled environment to another. The light show is free, but the good company'll cost you. Maxwell turned to find Walter settling himself onto the bench, uninvited but somehow not unwelcome. You're following me, Maxwell observed, not really minding. Walter chuckled. Small town. Not much following needed when there are only about 6 places to be after dark. He pulled a thermos from his jacket pocket and offered it to Maxwell. Spiked cider. Town secret. Apple cider from Wilson's orchard. Splash of Jim's homemade bourbon. Warms the bones. Maxwell accepted the thermos, taking a small sip. The cider was sweet and tart, the bourbon adding a pleasant burn. He handed it back with a nod of appreciation. So, Walter continued, did Lucia treat you right? The lasagna lived up to your recommendation. Good. Walter took a swig from the thermos. Saw you at Collins' Bakery earlier. Met our Liv, did you? Something about the way Walter said our Liv caught Maxwell's attention. There was affection there, but also something protective. Yes, Maxwell replied carefully. She makes an excellent cinnamon roll. That she does. And raises a fine boy too, all on her own. Walter's tone was casual, but his eyes, when they flicked to Maxwell's face, were assessing. Not an easy thing. Being a single parent in a small town where everyone knows your business and has an opinion about how you should live your life. Maxwell sensed there was more to this statement than idle conversation. I met Ethan briefly. Seems like a great kid. Walter nodded, his expression softening. That he is. Smart as a whip, kind-hearted like his mother. He paused, taking another drink from his thermos. Liv's been through a lot. Married her high school sweetheart, Jason Collins, Frank's nephew. Seemed like the perfect small-town love story, until Jason decided small-town life was too small for him. Left when Ethan was barely 2, headed to Boston for bigger opportunities. Sends checks sometimes, calls on birthdays if he remembers. But it's Liv who does the real work. Raising that boy, keeping that bakery running, supporting her dad as he gets older. Maxwell remained silent, understanding now that this wasn't just friendly conversation. Walter was telling him these things for a reason. Folks around here, Walter continued, we look out for Liv and Ethan. They're family to all of us, even those not related by blood. He fixed Maxwell with a direct look. We tend to get protective when strangers show interest. I'm not, Maxwell began, then stopped, unsure what he was trying to deny. That he found Liv attractive? That he'd thought about her more than was reasonable for someone he'd just met? That something about her direct gaze and lack of pretense had affected him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Walter saved him from having to finish the sentence. Just saying, Maxwell Reed, that people like Liv Collins are the heart of places like Mapleton. They're not tourist attractions or convenient distractions for city folk looking to play small town for a weekend. The assessment stung, partly because Maxwell couldn't honestly say it was entirely untrue. Wasn't that what he was doing? Playing at small-town life, knowing he could return to his real world whenever the novelty wore off. I understand, Maxwell said finally, and I respect that you're looking out for her. Walter studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. Good. Now that's settled, tell me about that Mustang of yours. 67, isn't it? My brother had one back in the day. Wimbledon white with the 289 V8. The conversation shifted to safer ground. Cars, fishing, the history of Mapleton. Walter turned out to be a treasure trove of local knowledge. Spinning tales of the town's founding, the Great Flood of 72, and the time the governor's motorcade got lost and ended up at the high school graduation ceremony instead of the interstate. By the time they parted ways, the stars had fully emerged and a comfortable camaraderie had formed between them. As Maxwell walked back to the inn, he found himself wondering about Liv Collins, her story, her struggles, the life she'd built here in this small corner of Vermont. The next morning, Maxwell woke to sunlight streaming through curtains he'd forgotten to close. For a disorienting moment, he didn't recognize his surroundings. The handmade quilt, the oak furniture, the absence of the cityscape he usually saw upon waking. Then memory returned. Mapleton, the inn, his impromptu escape from New York. He showered and dressed in the last of his clean clothes, jeans and a cashmere sweater that had seen better days. If he was going to extend his stay, he'd need to find somewhere to do laundry or purchase some additional items. Downstairs, the dining room was set for breakfast, a sideboard with coffee, juice and pastries, plus a chalkboard announcing that today's hot offering was blueberry pancakes with maple syrup. Nancy Winters bustled about, refilling coffee cups for the other guests, an elderly couple poring over a map and a woman about Maxwell's age typing furiously on a laptop. Good morning, Mr. Reed, Nancy greeted him. Sleep well? Very, Maxwell replied truthfully. He hadn't slept so soundly in months, maybe years. And please call me Max. Nancy beamed as if he'd given her a precious gift instead of permission to use his first name. Well, Max, help yourself to coffee and I'll bring you some pancakes. Unless you'd prefer eggs. Pancakes sound perfect, Maxwell said, reaching for a mug from the stack on the sideboard. The coffee was strong and flavorful, nothing like the precisely calibrated espresso from his imported Italian machine at home. As he sipped, Maxwell glanced at the newspaper another guest had left behind, the Mapleton Gazette, a weekly publication that seemed to cover everything from town council meetings to high school sports to personal milestones. The front page story was about the upcoming fall festival, complete with a schedule of events and a reminder that proceeds would support the library renovation fund. Nancy arrived with a plate stacked high with blueberry pancakes, a small pitcher of real maple syrup on the side. Local blueberries, she informed him proudly. Froze them myself in July when they were at their peak. The pancakes were light, fluffy, and studded with plump blueberries that burst with flavor. The maple syrup, dark amber and richly aromatic, was nothing like the commercial brands available in New York supermarkets. As Maxwell ate, his thoughts returned to Liv and her son. Walter's words from the night before echoed in his mind, his warning thinly veiled but clear, about Liv not being a tourist attraction for city visitors. The old man had been right to be concerned. Maxwell had no business developing any kind of attachment to a single mother with deep roots in a community where he was just passing through. And yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Collins Bakery, toward the woman with amber eyes who had served him coffee and spoken to him without a trace of the deference he was accustomed to receiving. After breakfast, Maxwell thanked Nancy and inquired about laundry facilities. "Planning to extend your stay?" she asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. "Perhaps for the fall festival," Maxwell replied, surprising himself with the decision even as he spoke it. "It sounds interesting." Nancy nodded approvingly. "There's a washer and dryer in the basement guests can use, $2 a load. Or if you prefer, Abigail's laundry service on Elm Street will do it for you, but they charge a premium." Maxwell opted for the basement facilities, then set out for a walk around town. The day was bright and clear, perfect autumn weather. He found himself heading toward Collins Bakery before consciously deciding to go there, drawn by memories of cinnamon rolls and amber eyes. The bakery was busy when he arrived, a line stretching to the door. Maxwell joined it, noting the easy conversation between customers, updates on children's activities, comments about the weather, discussions about the festival preparations. When he reached the counter, it wasn't Liv but an older man with the same amber eyes, Frank Collins. He presumed the father Liv had mentioned. "What can I get you?" Frank asked, his manner friendly but reserved. "Coffee, black." And Maxwell glanced at the display case, not seeing the cinnamon rolls that had made such an impression yesterday. "Cinnamon rolls are Tuesdays and Fridays," Frank said, correctly interpreting his search. "Today's special is apple turnovers, my daughter's recipe, with a touch of rosemary that sounds strange but works beautifully. I'll try one." Then, Maxwell decided. As Frank turned to prepare his order, the kitchen door swung open, and Liv emerged carrying a tray of fresh-baked bread loaves. She spotted Maxwell and paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before she composed herself. "Back again, New York," she said, setting the tray down and moving to help her father. "I heard you met our town ambassador last night." "Walter?" "Yes, we had an interesting conversation in the square." Something knowing passed through Liv's expression. "I bet you did." She poured his coffee while her father wrapped an apple turnover in wax paper. "Dad, this is Maxwell Reed from New York. Max, my father, Frank Collins." Frank extended a flour-dusted hand, which Maxwell shook. "Nice to meet you, sir." "You too, young man," Frank replied, though at 60-something he was not that much older than Maxwell. "Staying for the festival, I hear." News truly did travel fast in Mapleton. "That's the plan," Maxwell confirmed, paying for his breakfast. Exact change this time, earning a small nod from Liv. "Mom! Mom!" The excited voice preceded Ethan's entrance through the bakery's front door. He was accompanied by an older woman, who must have been the Mrs. Gunderson mentioned yesterday. "Guess what? I got picked to be the apple harvest prince for the festival parade." Liv's face lit up with pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You'll need to practice your royal wave." Ethan demonstrated a comically exaggerated wave, then noticed Maxwell. His eyes widened. "You're still here. Did you see Spider-Man yet? Did you bring pictures of New York? Can you see the Statue of Liberty from your window?" "Ethan," Liv began, but Maxwell cut in gently. "No Spider-Man sightings yet, but I do have a pretty good view from my apartment. And yes, on clear days you can see the Statue of Liberty, though it's quite small from that distance." Ethan looked impressed, then thoughtful. "Are you staying for the fall festival? I get to ride on a float and everything. Mom made my costume. It's got a crown made of apple branches and everything." "I wouldn't miss it," Maxwell said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. The boy's face lit up. "Awesome. Maybe after you could tell me more about New York. I want to go there someday. They have museums with dinosaur bones and spaceships and everything." Ethan, Mr. Reed might have other plans. Liv interjected, though her tone was gentle. "Actually," Maxwell found himself saying, I'd be happy to answer any questions about New York. I've lived there most of my life. Liv gave him a look he couldn't quite interpret. Caution, perhaps, or assessment. Well, we'll see. Right now, young Apple Prince, you need to get to school. Mrs. Gunderson is waiting. After Ethan departed, still buzzing with excitement about his festival role, Maxwell took his coffee and turnover to a small table by the window. The pastry was exceptional, buttery, flaky, with apples that retained their texture and flavor, enhanced by the unexpected hint of rosemary. As he ate, Maxwell watched the activity behind the counter. Liv and her father worked together with the easy rhythm of people who had shared a space for years, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with glances and gestures as much as with words. It was a dance of sorts, graceful and efficient. When the morning rush subsided, Liv approached his table with the coffee pot. "Refill, please," Maxwell said, pushing his mug toward her. As she poured, he noticed the faint circles under her eyes, the slight droop to her shoulders. "Long hours," he commented. She shrugged. "Baker's life. Up at 4 to bed by 10. Repeat until retirement or collapse, whichever comes first." Despite the weariness in her posture, her smile was genuine. "Dad insists on handling the bread still, but his arthritis makes it painful. I try to take over when he's not looking. He seems proud of the bakery," Maxwell observed. "And of you." Something flickered across Liv's face, pleasure mixed with a hint of sadness. This place is his legacy. 4th generation now, with Ethan helping on weekends sometimes. Though who knows if he'll want to continue the tradition when he grows up. He's got big city dreams, that one. "New York isn't going anywhere," Maxwell said. "There's plenty of time for him to explore when he's older." Liv studied him for a moment. "Says the man who escaped the big city to hide out in our little town." Chapter 4. The Fall Festival. The next few days fell into a pattern that felt both foreign and strangely right to Maxwell. Mornings began with breakfast at the inn, followed by a visit to Colin's bakery for coffee, and whatever Liv's special of the day happened to be. Afternoons were spent exploring Mapleton and its surroundings, hiking trails through forests ablaze with autumn colors, quiet roads winding past old farms and colonial houses, the shores of the lake where Walter could often be found with his fishing rod. Maxwell found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, perhaps decades. He skipped stones across the lake's surface, something he'd loved as a boy in Detroit. He browsed the town's small bookshop, purchasing actual paper books instead of downloading digital versions to his tablet. He sat on benches in the town square, watching people go about their daily lives without schedules or assistance or digital reminders. Each evening, he checked in with Diana via brief text messages, assuring her he was fine, dealing with company matters that absolutely couldn't wait. He kept his phone off most of the time, though, preferring the silence to the constant demands of his real life. On Wednesday evening, he was sitting at Harvey's pub, nursing a locally brewed IPA and making conversation with the bartender, when the door opened and Liv walked in. She was dressed differently than he'd seen her before, jeans and a soft green sweater instead of her bakery apron, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders instead of confined in a practical ponytail. She spotted him at the bar and hesitated, clearly considering whether to acknowledge him or pretend she hadn't seen him. After a moment she approached, claiming the stool next to his. "Fancy meeting you here, New York," she said, signaling to the bartender, who nodded and began preparing what was evidently her usual drink. "First night off in a while?" Maxwell asked, noting the way she rolled her shoulders as if releasing tension. "Dad insisted on closing up tonight. Said I needed a break." She accepted the glass of white wine the bartender placed in front of her. "Ethan's at a sleepover with his friend Tyler, so I'm temporarily off duty as both baker and mum." Maxwell raised his glass in a small toast. "To well-deserved breaks." Liv clinked her glass against his, studying him over the rim as she took a sip. "So a week in Mapleton, still just passing through?" The question made Maxwell pause. It had been a week, hadn't it? 7 days since he'd impulsively driven away from New York, from his life, from responsibilities and obligations that had once seemed so important. 7 days of small-town rhythms, of genuine conversations, of rediscovering what it felt like to just be present. "I suppose I am," he said finally, though the words felt hollow, "though I did promise Ethan I'd stay for the fall festival." Liv smiled, a genuine expression that reached her amber eyes. "He's been talking non-stop about showing you his prince costume. I've never seen him so excited about the festival before." "He's a great kid," Maxwell said sincerely. You should be proud. I am. The simple statement carried the weight of years of single motherhood, of sacrifices and challenges Maxwell could only imagine. He's the best thing in my life. There was a brief, comfortable silence as they both sipped their drinks. Harvey's pub was busy but not crowded, a mix of locals unwinding after work and a few visitors staying at the inn or passing through town. Classic rock played softly in the background, providing a pleasant backdrop to the murmur of conversations. Walter gave me the "don't mess with our Liv" speech, Maxwell said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. Liv groaned, covering her face with her hand. Of course he did. Walter thinks he's my honorary uncle or something. It was quite effective, Maxwell assured her. Very protective, slightly menacing, with just the right amount of "I know people who would help me hide a body." To his delight, Liv laughed, a genuine throaty sound that made several heads turn in their direction. Walter couldn't hurt a fly, but he does look out for me and Ethan. This whole town does, really. She took another sip of wine. It can be suffocating sometimes, living in a place where everyone knows your business. But when things get tough, there's no better place to be. Like when Jason left, Maxwell ventured, then immediately regretted it when Liv's expression closed. Walter's been talking too much, she said, her tone cooler now. Yes, like then. The town rallied around us. Helped with Ethan, brought food, made sure the bakery stayed afloat until I could get my bearings. She fixed him with a direct look. But that's ancient history now. We're doing fine on our own. Maxwell nodded, accepting the gentle rebuff. I didn't mean to pry. Liv's expression softened. It's okay. Small towns run on stories, so I'm sure you've heard plenty about me by now. She tilted her head, studying him. But I've heard surprisingly little about you, considering how Nancy usually interrogates her guests. Just that you're from New York, drive a beautiful classic car, and apparently have the freedom to disappear from your life for weeks at a time. It was an invitation to share, to balance the scales of vulnerability. Maxwell considered how much to reveal, how honest to be with this woman who valued directness. I run a technology company, he said finally. Reed Innovations. We develop software solutions for various industries. It's successful. Successful enough that no one questions when the CEO vanishes without warning. Liv's tone was light, but her gaze was perceptive. Maxwell smiled ruefully. I have an excellent executive team and an assistant who's probably plotting my demise right now for the stress I've caused her. He rotated his glass on the bar top, watching the condensation leave trails. The truth is, I woke up one morning last week and couldn't remember why any of it mattered. The meetings, the deals, the constant pressure to innovate and expand, it all seemed pointless suddenly. He hadn't planned to be so candid, but something about Liv's direct gaze made pretense seem foolish. So I got in my car and drove. No destination in mind, just away. Liv was quiet for a moment, considering his words. And you ended up here, in a town most people couldn't find on a map. Best wrong turn I've ever taken, Maxwell said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Their conversation flowed easily after that, Liv sharing stories of growing up in Mapleton, the challenges and joys of raising Ethan, her dreams for the bakery's future. Maxwell found himself reciprocating with tales of his own childhood in Detroit, his father's auto factory job, the scholarship that had taken him to MIT, and the startup he'd built from the ground up. He carefully edited out the details that might intimidate or create distance, the 8-figure deals, the celebrity clients, the homes in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and Aspen. It wasn't deception, he told himself, just focusing on the aspects of his life that might bridge their different worlds rather than highlight the chasms between them. By the time they said goodnight, several hours had passed, and Maxwell realized he'd enjoyed the evening more than any of the high-profile social events that normally filled his calendar. Liv declined his offer to walk her home, reminding him that Mapleton was perfectly safe and her house was just 3 blocks away. See you tomorrow? She asked, pausing at the pub's door. Cinnamon roll day, Maxwell confirmed with a smile. I wouldn't miss it. The next few days continued in this pleasant rhythm, with one significant change. Maxwell found himself spending more time at Colin's Bakery, not just as a customer, but as an impromptu helper. It began when he noticed Frank struggling with a heavy sack of flour, his arthritis clearly causing him pain. Let me get that, Maxwell had said, moving behind the counter without thinking to lift the 50-pound bag. Frank had started to protest, but then relented with a grateful nod. One task led to another. moving supplies from the storeroom, breaking down cardboard boxes for recycling, even learning to operate the ancient espresso machine when the Friday morning rush overwhelmed Liv and her part-time helper, a community college student named Jenny. Ethan, visiting the bakery after school, was delighted to find Maxwell there and immediately pressed him into service as a homework helper, particularly with math problems that were giving him trouble. "You explain it better than Ms. Abernathy," Ethan declared after Maxwell helped him understand fractions using actual pieces of pie from the bakery case. "She just keeps saying the same thing over and over, but slower and louder. Like I'm from another country or something." By Friday afternoon, Maxwell felt like he'd gained a temporary place in the Collins family orbit. Liv had initially been wary of his help, proud and independent to her core, but the practical reality of having another pair of capable hands during busy periods eventually won out. "Just don't expect payment," she warned him. "I'm not hiring, and I don't believe in unpaid labor. Coffee and conversation is payment enough," Maxwell assured her, meaning every word. Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the fall festival. Maxwell woke earlier than usual, feeling an anticipation he typically associated with major business launches or important presentations, not small-town celebrations. After a quick breakfast at the inn, he walked to the town square, where shuttle buses were loading passengers bound for the fairgrounds just outside town. The square was bustling with activity, vendors setting up booths, volunteers arranging hay bales and cornstalks for decorative effect, and the high school marching band practicing their parade routine. "Max." "Over here!" Ethan's voice carried across the square, and Maxwell turned to see the boy waving enthusiastically from beside one of the buses. He was dressed in what must be his Apple Harvest Prince costume: rustic brown pants, a golden shirt, and an impressive crown fashioned from twisted apple branches and adorned with small, polished apples. Beside him stood Liv, looking different than Maxwell had ever seen her. Instead of her practical bakery clothes, she wore a flowing dress in autumn colors, deep orange, russet, and gold, with her hair braided and woven with small flowers and leaves. "Harvest Festival Committee member," she explained when she noticed his appreciative gaze. "We're required to dress the part. So I'm supposed to represent the spirit of the harvest or something equally ridiculous." "You look beautiful," Maxwell said simply, the words out before he could consider their appropriateness. A faint blush colored Liv's cheeks, but before she could respond, Ethan tugged at Maxwell's sleeve. "Do you like my crown? Mom made it, and I get to ride on the biggest float and wave at everyone and throw candy." His excitement was contagious, his amber eyes, so like his mother's, bright with anticipation. "Very impressive," Maxwell assured him solemnly. "Very regal." "I have to go now," Ethan announced. "The parade participants have a special bus, but I'll see you at the fairgrounds, right? Promise?" "I promise," Maxwell said, finding himself instantly enveloped in a quick, fierce hug before Ethan ran off to join the other children in festival costumes boarding a decorated school bus. Liv watched him go with a soft expression that transformed her features. "He's been counting down the days," she said. "Not just for the festival, but to show you everything. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable." Maxwell considered the question seriously. A week ago, perhaps even a few days ago, it might have. The weight of a child's expectations, the implications of allowing himself to become important to someone so young when his stay was temporary, these would have been concerns. Now, though, he found himself genuinely moved by Ethan's attachment. "Not uncomfortable," he said finally. "Honored, actually." Liv studied him for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw in his expression. "We should get on the bus if we want good spots for the parade. It starts in an hour, but the fairgrounds will be packed already." The fairgrounds, it turned out, were transformed farmlands on the outskirts of Mapleton, with rolling hills providing a picturesque backdrop to the festivities. Tents and booths dotted the landscape, offering everything from artisanal crafts to local foods. A small stage had been erected for musical performances, and various activity areas had been set up for different age groups: pumpkin carving for adults, face painting for children, and hay rides for all ages. Liv was immediately pulled away by festival responsibilities, leaving Maxwell to explore on his own. He wandered through the booths, admiring handcrafted furniture, local honey, knitted goods, and pottery. He sampled apple cider, pumpkin soup, and maple candy. He watched a blacksmith demonstration and listened to a local folk band performing traditional harvest songs. Throughout it all, he observed the community interactions, the genuine interest people took in each other's lives, the easy laughter, the way children ran freely from one attraction to another, without parents hovering anxiously. It was a world apart from the guarded, isolated existence he lived in New York, where neighbors in the same building might not even know each other's names. The parade, when it began, wound its way through the fairgrounds, floats created by local businesses and community organizations, the high school marching band, tractors decorated with cornstalks and pumpkins, and children in various harvest-themed costumes. Ethan's float was near the end, a massive apple-shaped creation with a throne at its center where the boy sat, waving regally and occasionally tossing candy to the cheering crowd. When he spotted Maxwell, his face lit up, and his wave became even more enthusiastic. "That's my friend from New York," Maxwell heard him announcing proudly to another child on the float. "He lives in a building taller than clouds." Something twisted in Maxwell's chest, a mixture of warmth and an unexpected ache. Friend. When was the last time anyone had referred to him that way without an agenda? In his world, people were connections, competitors, employees, or assets. Friendship, true friendship untainted by business considerations, had become rare to the point of extinction. As the day progressed, Maxwell found himself fully immersed in the festival atmosphere. He helped judge a pie contest, discovering that Frank Collins's apple pie with rosemary crust took first place, participated in a three-legged race paired with Walter. They came in last but laughed the entire time, and even tried his hand at the dunk tank, successfully sending the high school principal plunging into the water to the delight of watching students. Late in the afternoon, he encountered Liv again, her festival duties apparently complete for the time being. She looked tired but happy, her cheeks flushed from the cool air. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the food area. "More than I expected," Maxwell admitted. "I can't remember the last time I attended something like this. No harvest festivals in Manhattan?" Liv teased. "Central Park does have a pumpkin patch set up each year," Maxwell said. "But it's curated, Instagram-ready. Nothing like this." He gestured to the honest, somewhat messy reality of the fairgrounds, hay scattered everywhere, children with sticky faces running between attractions, booths that had clearly been handmade with varying degrees of skill. Too authentic for city tastes. There was no judgment in Liv's tone, just genuine curiosity. Maxwell considered the question. "Not too authentic, just unfiltered. In my world, everything is designed, managed, optimized, even the supposedly spontaneous moments." Chapter 5. Worlds Collide. They walked in companionable silence toward the food area, where local restaurants had set up booths offering everything from barbecue to Vietnamese spring rolls, reflecting Mapleton's surprising culinary diversity. "Mom." "Max?" Ethan's voice cut through the crowd as he ran toward them, his crown slightly askew but his smile radiant. "Did you see me on the float? Did you see me throw candy? Tyler dropped his whole bucket, but I was super careful with mine. You were the most regal apple prince I've ever seen," Liv assured him, adjusting his crown. "Are you hungry?" "We were just going to get something to eat." "Starving," Ethan declared dramatically. "Being royalty is exhausting. Can we get corn dogs?" "And funnel cake, please?" Liv laughed. "How about corn dogs now, funnel cake later? Too much sugar, and you'll be bouncing off the walls all night." This compromise was deemed acceptable, and soon they were seated at a picnic table, Ethan happily devouring a corn dog, while Liv and Maxwell shared a platter of barbecue from Harvey's Pub's outdoor booth. "So," Ethan said between bites, "when are you going back to New York?" The question, innocent but direct, caught Maxwell off guard. He glanced at Liv, who looked equally interested in his answer. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Soon, I suppose. I have responsibilities there." Ethan's face fell slightly. "But you'll come back to visit, right? You promised to tell me more about the dinosaur museum and the spaceships and everything." Maxwell felt a tightness in his chest. "I did promise that, didn't I?" "You don't have to," Liv began, but Maxwell cut her off gently. "I keep my promises, Ethan," he said, meeting the boy's hopeful gaze. "I'll make sure we have that conversation, one way or another." This seemed to satisfy Ethan, who immediately launched into a detailed account of his parade experience, including a minor scandal involving the apple harvest princess, a girl named Zoe, who had refused to share her throne despite explicit instructions from the parade coordinator. As Ethan talked, Maxwell found himself studying Liv's profile, the way sunlight caught in her chestnut hair, the small smile that played at the corners of her mouth as she listened to her son, the relaxed set of her shoulders so different from the tension she carried during busy bakery hours. She must have felt his gaze because she turned toward him, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Maxwell simply shook his head slightly and smiled, unable to articulate the strange mix of emotions he was experiencing. Contentment in this moment, coupled with an awareness of its temporary nature, appreciation for being included in this family tableau, while knowing he was just a visitor in their lives. After lunch, Ethan spotted some of his friends, and after securing permission from Liv, ran off to join them at the pumpkin decorating station, leaving the adults alone at the picnic table. "He's going to miss you," Liv said without preamble, watching her son's retreating figure. "When you go back to your real life." The words stung not because they were accusatory, Liv's tone had been matter-of-fact, but because they were true. This wasn't his real life. The past 10 days had been an interlude, a temporary escape from reality, not a new beginning. "I'll miss him too," Maxwell said honestly. "And the bakery, and—" He hesitated, then finished softly. "And you." Liv turned to look at him directly, her amber eyes searching his face. Max, he corrected gently. "In New York, I'm Maxwell Reed, CEO, board member, venture capitalist. Here, I'm just Max. And I like being Max a lot more than I've liked being Maxwell Reed in a very long time." Something softened in Liv's expression. "Max, then. But the point remains. You have a life waiting for you in New York. A company that needs its leader. People who depend on you." She gestured around at the fairgrounds, the small-town celebration in full swing. "This isn't your world. Maybe it could be," Maxwell said, the words surprising him as much as they clearly surprised Liv. "Or maybe the two worlds don't have to be so separate." Liv shook her head, though not unkindly. "People like you pass through Mapleton occasionally, looking for a break, a taste of small-town charm, a hallmark movie moment. They enjoy it, they appreciate it, and then they return to their real lives because this—" She waved a hand to encompass the festival, the town herself. "This isn't enough. Not for someone who's known private jets and penthouse views." Maxwell wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was more complicated. Could he really walk away from everything he'd built? From the company that employed thousands, the wealth that gave him options most people couldn't imagine, the position of influence he'd worked so hard to achieve. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted finally. "I just know that the last 10 days have felt more real, more meaningful, than the past 10 years of my supposedly real life." Liv studied him for a long moment, then stood, brushing crumbs from her Harvest Festival dress. "Come on. There's something I want to show you." Curious, Maxwell followed her away from the main festival area, up a gently sloping hill at the edge of the fairgrounds. At the top was a single massive oak tree, its branches spread wide, leaves turned to brilliant orange and gold in the autumn light. "Best view in Mapleton," Liv said, stopping beneath the tree's canopy. "You can see the whole town from here." Maxwell looked out over the landscape, the fairgrounds below them alive with activity. Beyond that, the small town center with its historic buildings and church steeple. And further still, the lake glimmering in the afternoon sun. Surrounding it all were rolling hills covered in the fiery colors of fall foliage, a panorama that no Manhattan skyscraper could rival. "I used to come up here as a teenager when I needed perspective," Liv continued, her voice soft with memory. "When my mother was sick, when I was fighting with my father, when Jason and I were deciding whether to stay in Mapleton or try our luck somewhere bigger." She leaned against the tree trunk, her profile outlined against the view. Jason couldn't see it, the beauty, the value of this place. He saw limitations, a ceiling to what was possible. He wanted more than Mapleton could offer. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I sometimes wonder if I should have gone with him for Ethan's sake, given him more opportunities than a small town can provide." "Ethan seems happy," Maxwell observed. "Thriving. He is, but he dreams big, like his questions about New York, museums, skyscrapers. Sometimes I worry I'm clipping his wings by raising him here." Maxwell considered this, understanding the genuine concern behind her words. "Having options doesn't mean having to exercise them all," he said finally. "Ethan has roots here, community, belonging. Those are foundations, not limitations. When he's ready, he can explore the wider world, knowing he always has this place to come back to." Liv looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such insight. "That's exactly what I needed to hear, actually." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the festival below. Then Liv turned to him with an expression that had shifted from pensive to mischievous. Race you to the bottom? She suggested, nodding toward the grassy slope. Maxwell blinked, certain he'd misheard. Race down the hill? So I'm scared, New York. There was a challenge in her amber eyes now. Afraid to get grass stains on those designer jeans? Without waiting for his response, Liv gathered her Harvest Festival dress in one hand and took off down the hill, her laughter trailing behind her. For a split second, Maxwell stood frozen in disbelief. The idea of the CEO of Reed Innovations rolling down a hill like a child was absurd, unprofessional, undignified. And yet, with a whoop that startled even himself, Maxwell took off after her, letting gravity and momentum carry him faster and faster down the slope. Halfway down, he lost his footing and found himself literally rolling, the world spinning in a blur of blue sky and autumn leaves, until he came to rest at the bottom, breathless and laughing harder than he had in decades. Liv collapsed beside him, equally breathless, leaves caught in her braided hair, her harvest dress hiked up to show denim shorts underneath, practical even in festival attire. Your face, she gasped between bursts of laughter. When I suggested racing, I thought you were going to have an aneurysm. Maxwell propped himself up on one elbow, trying to catch his breath. I probably looked like I was calculating the liability insurance implications. This set off another round of laughter between them. When they finally calmed, Maxwell realized they were lying very close together on the grass, their faces inches apart. Liv seemed to realize it too, her laughter fading as her eyes met his. For a moment, the festival around them seemed to disappear, the sounds fading, the world narrowing to just the two of them on the grass, autumn sunshine warming their faces, the scent of apples and cinnamon and something uniquely Liv enveloping them. Mom! Max, what are you doing on the ground? Did you fall down? Ethan's voice broke the spell as he ran toward them, face painted like a tiger, clutching a small pumpkin decorated with googly eyes and pipe cleaners. Liv sat up quickly, smoothing her dress and picking leaves from her hair. We were just being silly, she told her son with a smile that seemed a touch forced, racing down the hill like kids. Without me? Ethan looked deeply offended. That's so unfair. I want to race too. And so the next 15 minutes were spent racing down the hill in various configurations, all three together. Parents versus child, boys versus girls, with Ethan declaring himself honorary girl when Liv needed a teammate. By the end, they were all grass-stained, disheveled, and happier than Maxwell could remember being in years. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the festival transformed. Strings of lights illuminated the paths between booths. Bonfires were lit in stone circles, and the stage was prepared for evening musical performances. We should head back, Liv said, brushing grass from Ethan's hair. You've got school tomorrow, young man, festival or no festival. But Mom, Ethan protested, they're going to light the big pumpkin, and there's going to be dancing. And you're going to be a zombie at school if we don't get you home at a reasonable hour, Liv countered, though her tone was gentle. We've had a full day, Apple Prince. Even royalty needs rest. Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat, but then he brightened. Can Max come over? He could read me a story before bed. He does the best voices, way better than you, Mom, no offense. Liv looked momentarily flustered, glancing at Maxwell. I'm sure Max has plans. None whatsoever, Maxwell interjected smoothly. And I'd be honored to read a bedtime story if it's all right with your mom. Caught between her son's hopeful expression and Maxwell's calm assurance, Liv relented. Fine, one story. Then bed, no arguments. Ethan's cheer could probably be heard across the fairgrounds. They made their way back through the festival, stopping to say goodbyes to various townspeople, all of whom seemed to know and adore Ethan. Several greeted Maxwell by name now, a development that both surprised and touched him. In just 10 days, he'd gone from anonymous visitor to recognized community member. Walter intercepted them near the exit, cider thermos in hand as usual. Heading out already? Tonight's just getting started. They're setting up the dance floor by the main stage. School night, Liv explained, gesturing to Ethan, who was attempting to stifle a yawn. Ah, the responsibilities of youth, Walter nodded sagely. He turned to Maxwell with a twinkle in his eye. And you, city boy? Turning in early too? I've been invited for a bedtime story, Maxwell said with exaggerated formality. Walter's eyebrows shot up, and he gave Liv a look that made her blush visibly even in the fading light. Purely in a narrative capacity, she clarified quickly. Ethan's request. Walter hummed, not even trying to hide his amusement. Well, enjoy your narrative capacity, Max. Good night. Young Prince Ethan, your royal performance was most impressive today. Ethan beamed at this formal acknowledgement, his fatigue temporarily forgotten. The Collins home turned out to be a charming two-story Victorian, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim, just a few blocks from the bakery. A wraparound porch featured a porch swing and several potted mums in autumn colors. It looked like it belonged on a postcard. Quintessential New England charm. It's not much, Liv said as she unlocked the front door, suddenly seeming self-conscious. It was my grandparents' house. Dad moved in with us after Mom passed, but now he has the apartment above the bakery. Says he sleeps better with the smell of bread rising. It's beautiful, Maxwell said sincerely, taking in the warm, lived-in interior. Comfortable furniture that prioritized function over fashion. Walls decorated with Ethan's artwork and family photographs. Bookshelves overflowing with well-read volumes. Ethan immediately took Maxwell's hand, tugging him toward the stairs. Come see my room. I have all the dinosaur books and a model of the solar system that lights up and… Ethan, Liv interrupted gently. Let Max come inside properly first. And you need to get ready for bed. Teeth brushed, pajamas on. Then story time. Ethan sighed dramatically but complied, thundering up the stairs to prepare for bed. Make yourself comfortable, Liv told Maxwell, gesturing to the living room. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea, something stronger. Coffee would be great, thanks, Maxwell replied, moving to examine the photos displayed on the fireplace mantel while Liv disappeared into the kitchen. The photographs told the story of the Collins family through the years. Liv as a child with her parents in front of the bakery. Teenage Liv in a graduation cap and gown. A young Liv with a tall, handsome man who must be Jason, looking happy and in love. Ethan as an infant, as a toddler, and at various stages of childhood, his amber eyes and bright smile consistent through the years. Cream or sugar? Liv called from the kitchen. Black is fine, Maxwell answered, still studying the photos. When Liv returned with 2 mugs of coffee, she found him examining a picture of her and Ethan at what appeared to be the fall festival from a previous year, both wearing harvest-themed costumes. He was the pumpkin prince that year, she explained, handing Maxwell his coffee. They rotate the themes: apples, pumpkins, corn, general harvest. He was devastated when he wasn't chosen last year. This year's apple prince role was a big deal. Maxwell accepted the mug, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Thank you for including me today, he said quietly. It meant more than I can express. Liv looked momentarily flustered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Ethan wanted you there. And you've been… helpful at the bakery. It seemed right. Before Maxwell could respond, thunderous footsteps announced Ethan's return. He appeared in dinosaur-printed pajamas, hair damp from washing, clutching several books to his chest. I picked 3 options, he announced. You can choose which one to read. Maxwell examined the offerings, a book about space exploration, one about undersea creatures, and a fantasy novel featuring dragons. Tough choice, he said seriously. What's your current favorite? The dragon one, Ethan admitted. But Mom says I've heard it too many times. Dragons it is then, Maxwell decided, earning a delighted grin from Ethan. Liv followed them upstairs, watching from the doorway as Ethan settled into his bed, a race car-shaped affair surrounded by bookshelves, a desk covered in art supplies, and walls decorated with maps, science posters, and more of his own artwork. Maxwell sat on the edge of the bed and began reading, adopting different voices for each character as promised. Ethan listened with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting with comments or questions. By the end of the 2nd chapter, his eyes were drooping despite his obvious efforts to stay awake. To be continued tomorrow, Maxwell said gently, closing the book. Promise, Ethan murmured sleepily. Maxwell hesitated, aware of Liv watching from the doorway. If not tomorrow, then soon, he amended. Sleep well, Apple Prince. Ethan was asleep before they reached the door, downstairs. An awkward silence fell between them, the intimacy of the bedtime ritual highlighting the temporary, uncertain nature of Maxwell's place in their lives. He really likes you, Liv said finally, picking up their coffee mugs and carrying them to the kitchen. Maxwell followed, leaning against the doorframe as she rinsed them in the sink. He doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. The feeling is mutual, Maxwell replied. He's an exceptional kid. Liv turned to face him, her expression serious. That's why I need to be careful. For his sake. The implication was clear, careful about Maxwell, about how much access to allow, about what expectations to permit. I understand, Maxwell said softly, and I respect that. I would never intentionally hurt Ethan. Intentions aren't always enough, Liv replied, her voice equally soft. Sometimes circumstances make decisions for us. The distance between them in the kitchen suddenly seemed both too great and not great enough. Maxwell found himself acutely aware of the domesticity of the moment. The quiet house, the sleeping child upstairs, the woman looking at him with a mixture of wariness and something he couldn't quite name. I should go, he said reluctantly. Thank you for tonight. All of it. Liv nodded, walking him to the front door. On the porch, illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, she seemed to struggle with what to say. Good night. Max from New York, she finally settled on, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Good night. Liv from Mapleton, he returned with a matching smile. He was halfway down the porch steps when his phone, which had been silent most of the day, vibrated in his pocket. Habitually, he pulled it out to check the notification. What he saw made him freeze. A text from Diana. Emergency, Jenkins deal falling apart. Board called emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Need you back now. Private jet standing by at Burlington Airport. Car will pick you up at your location in 30 minutes. Sending coordinates now. Maxwell stared at the screen, the real world crashing back with brutal efficiency. Is everything okay? Liv asked from the porch, having noticed his sudden stillness. He looked up at her, framed in her doorway, looking concerned and beautiful, in her slightly rumpled Harvest Festival dress, leaves still caught in her hair from their hill racing. Work emergency, he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. I have to go back to New York, tonight. Chapter 6. Two Worlds. The transformation in Liv's expression was immediate, the openness, the warmth vanishing behind a carefully composed mask. I see, she said, her voice neutral. Well, duty calls. Maxwell felt caught between two realities, the urgent message burning in his hand and the woman standing before him, already withdrawing emotionally. It's a company crisis, he explained, hating how corporate the word sounded. A major deal is collapsing and there's a board meeting first thing tomorrow. You don't owe me explanations, Liv said, crossing her arms. You have a life to get back to. We always knew that. Her reasonable tone somehow made it worse. Maxwell climbed back up the steps, stopping just short of where she stood. Liv, this isn't how I wanted to leave. I was going to— What? She interrupted, a flicker of emotion breaking through her composed facade. Say a proper goodbye. Leave a forwarding address. Friend us on social media. She shook her head. It's better this way. Clean break. Ethan will be disappointed, but kids are resilient. Another text vibrated in Maxwell's hand. Coordinates to the Mapleton Inn, where the car would pick him up in 28 minutes. The countdown had begun. I need to pack my things, he said, feeling helpless against the machinery of his other life that was already in motion. Private jets being fueled, drivers dispatched, board members notified. Then you should go, Liv replied, her hand moving to the door as if ready to close it between them. Liv, please, Maxwell said, reaching out but stopping short of touching her. This isn't the end. I can come back, or you and Ethan could visit New York. Don't, she cut him off, eyes flashing with sudden anger. Don't make promises you can't keep. We're not a weekend getaway or a charming anecdote for your Manhattan dinner parties. Oh, you should have seen this quaint little town I visited. The people were so authentic, so real. Her voice took on a mocking quality that bore no resemblance to her usual warm tone. The words stung, because they contained a kernel of truth Maxwell couldn't deny. How many times in the past had he treated experiences as collectibles, interesting stories to share at cocktail parties before moving on to the next novel encounter? That's not fair, he said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Ethan. What happened here? Between us? Nothing happened between us, Liv interrupted again, though her voice caught slightly on the words. You had a nice vacation from your real life. You helped out at the bakery, charmed the locals, made a little boy happy for a while. But vacations end, Maxwell. People go home. The use of his full name felt like a deliberate distancing. I meant what I said earlier, Maxwell insisted. These past days have been more real to me than anything in New York. Liv's expression softened fractionally. Maybe they have been. But your world is calling you back, and we both know you're going to answer. She glanced at his phone, still clutched in his hand. How long until your car arrives? 25 minutes. She nodded as if confirming something to herself. You should go pack. Maxwell stood his ground. I want to see Ethan before I leave. He's asleep. I'll wake him, just for a minute. I owe him a goodbye. Liv hesitated, then shook her head. No, that would be for you, not for him. Let him have his perfect day, with the memory of you reading him stories. That's kinder than a rushed goodbye he won't understand. She was right, of course. Waking Ethan would be selfish, a way to ease his own guilt, rather than considering what was best for the child. Maxwell nodded reluctantly. Will you tell him something for me? What would you like me to say? Liv asked, her voice neutral again. Maxwell thought carefully. Tell him that his New York friend had to go home unexpectedly, but that I kept the dragon book so I can finish the story next time I see him. And if there is no next time. Liv's amber eyes held his, challenging. There will be, Maxwell said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel, but desperately wanted to. This isn't goodbye, Liv, it's just, see you later. She didn't respond to this, simply nodded once. Safe travels, Maxwell. The formality was a dismissal. Maxwell recognized defeat when he saw it. He descended the porch steps, turned back once to find Liv still watching him, then walked away into the autumn night, the weight of his other life already settling back onto his shoulders. At the inn, Nancy Winters was surprised to see him rush in. Everything all right, Max? Work emergency, he explained briefly. I need to check out tonight. A car is coming for me in about 20 minutes. Nancy's eyebrows rose, but she didn't comment on the sudden departure. I'll prepare your bill. Do you need help with your things? No, thank you. I travel light. He hurried upstairs to pack his few belongings, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. The Jenkins deal was indeed critical. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition that had been in the works for months, carefully orchestrated to expand Reed Innovations' reach into new markets. If it collapsed, the financial repercussions would be significant, not just for the company, but for the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on its continued success. And yet, as Maxwell stuffed clothes into his overnight bag, all he could see was Ethan's face as he fell asleep. The trust in those amber eyes so like his mother's. All he could hear was Liv's voice, the hurt beneath her practical acceptance of his departure. His phone buzzed again. Car arriving in 10 minutes. Maxwell finished packing and carried his bag downstairs. Nancy had his bill ready, which he paid without checking the amount. It was lovely having you stay with us, she said, genuine warmth in her voice. You've made quite an impression on our little town in a short time. The feeling is mutual, Maxwell replied, surprised by the emotion threatening to choke his words. Mapleton is special. Nancy studied him with shrewd eyes. Places are just places, Max. It's the people that make them special. And some people are worth coming back for. She handed him his receipt. Your room will be available whenever you decide to return. Just give me a call. Outside, Maxwell took a deep breath of the cool Vermont air, so different from the atmosphere of Manhattan. Stars blanketed the sky above, visible in a way they never were in the city. The town square was quiet now, the fall festival having wound down for the evening, though a few lights still twinkled in the gazebo. His phone buzzed again. Car arrived. Sure enough, a black luxury SUV had pulled up in front of the inn, its engine purring quietly. The driver stepped out, a professional in a dark suit who opened the rear door without saying a word. Maxwell hesitated, looking back at the town that had somehow, in just 10 days, come to feel more like home than his penthouse ever had. Then he slid into the back seat, the door closing behind him with a soft, expensive thud. Burlington International Airport, sir, the driver confirmed, pulling away from the curb. The jet is fueled and ready. Estimated arrival in Manhattan is 1:30 a.m. Thank you, Maxwell replied automatically, watching through the window as Mapleton receded. The town square, the colonial buildings, Collins Bakery with its weathered wooden sign, and finally the leaving Mapleton, come back soon sign at the town limits. In his pocket was the key to the Mustang, which he'd left in the inn's parking lot with arrangements for it to be transported back to New York later. One more connection to Mapleton temporarily severed. The drive to Burlington passed in a blur of dark country roads, gradually giving way to more populated areas. Highway lights, and finally the small regional airport where a sleek private jet waited on the tarmac, Reed Innovations' logo gleaming on its tail. Within an hour of leaving Liv's porch, Maxwell was airborne, Vermont's autumn landscape falling away beneath him, replaced by clouds illuminated by moonlight. The luxury cabin of the company jet felt foreign now, too perfect, too controlled, too insulated from the real world below. A dossier waited on the table before him, prepared by Diana with her usual efficiency. Maxwell forced himself to focus, to absorb the details of the Jenkins crisis, to prepare for the battlefield of corporate negotiations he would face in just a few hours. By the time the jet touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, Maxwell Reed, CEO, had largely reasserted himself over Max from Mapleton. A different car, an even more luxurious SUV, whisked him into Manhattan, the city skyline glittering with its particular brand of promise and power. His penthouse was exactly as he'd left it 10 days ago, immaculate. Temperature perfectly controlled, every luxury in place, and yet it felt hollow now, a stage set rather than a home. Maxwell dropped his bag in the entryway and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city that never sleeps. Somewhere out there, people were making deals, breaking hearts, chasing dreams, losing hope. Somewhere down there, real life was happening in all its messy glory. Up here, in his glass and steel tower, Maxwell felt disconnected from it all in a way he never had before. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, he showered, changed into one of his perfectly tailored suits, and reviewed the Jenkins dossier until dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline. Diana was waiting when he arrived at Reed Innovations headquarters at 7:30 a.m. A tall, elegantly dressed woman with a tablet in one hand and coffee in the other. "Welcome back to civilization," she said, handing him the coffee. "You look different." Maxwell accepted the coffee without comment on her observation. "Bring me up to speed." For the next hour, they strategized in his corner office with its commanding view of Manhattan. Diana was brilliantly efficient as always, having already drafted 3 potential approaches to salvage the Jenkins deal. "The board is assembling in the main conference room," she informed him at 8:45. "Jenkins himself will be video conferencing. His team is threatening to walk if we don't improve our terms." "Let them threaten," Maxwell replied, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes negotiation. "We're in the stronger position and they know it. This is a negotiating tactic, nothing more." Diana studied him with narrowed eyes. "You seem surprisingly calm for someone who just flew in on an emergency basis." Maxwell considered this. It was true. The crisis that had seemed so urgent last night now appeared manageable, almost routine. Perhaps it was the perspective gained from his time away. Or perhaps it was the realization that corporate emergencies would always exist, would always demand his immediate attention, would always seem world-ending until the next one came along. "Let's just say I've had a refresher course in what constitutes a real emergency," he replied, straightening his tie. "Shall we?" The board meeting was exactly what Maxwell had expected. Concerned executives, financial projections, legal opinions, strategic posturing. He led the discussion with practiced authority, presenting a compromise approach that protected Reed Innovations' core interests while offering Jenkins enough concessions to save face. 3 hours later, the deal was back on track, the crisis averted. The board members impressed with their CEO's cool head and strategic thinking. "Masterful handling," commented Lawrence, the VP of Operations, as the meeting adjourned. "For someone who was off the grid for 10 days, you came back remarkably focused. Sometimes distance provides clarity," Maxwell replied, gathering his notes. As the boardroom emptied, Diana approached with his schedule. "You have lunch with Senator Harrington at 1, the quarterly review with R&D at 3, and dinner with the Japanese investors at 7. Also, your tailor called. Apparently you missed a fitting for the charity gala next week." The litany of obligations washed over Maxwell, each one a link in the chain of his carefully constructed life. "Cancel lunch with the senator," he said suddenly, "and the dinner." "Reschedule both." Diana blinked in surprise. "But the Japanese team flew in specifically to meet with you. Have Lawrence handle it. He knows the details of the expansion plan better than I do anyway." Maxwell stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I need to take care of something personal." "Another crisis?" Diana asked, concern evident in her voice. Maxwell considered the question. "The opposite, actually. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. I'll be back tomorrow." Without waiting for her response, he left the boardroom and made his way to the private elevator that would take him directly to the building's underground garage, where his collection of luxury vehicles waited. Within 20 minutes, he was crossing the George Washington Bridge, heading north once more. Not in the Mustang this time, but in a more practical SUV suited for the trip he had in mind. His phone rang, Diana undoubtedly with questions about his sudden departure. Maxwell silenced it, then thought better of it. Diana deserved an explanation, however brief. He pulled over at a rest stop and sent her a text. Personal matter. Back tomorrow. Trust Lawrence with the Japanese delegation. Time to give him more responsibility. Then he turned off his phone completely and continued driving north, the Manhattan skyline receding in his rearview mirror. It was nearly 6 in the evening when Maxwell pulled into Mapleton again, the small town preparing for nightfall, streetlights beginning to illuminate the main street. He drove directly to Collins' Bakery, only to find it closed, a handwritten sign in the window. Closed early for Ethan's school play. Back tomorrow at 6 a.m. Of course, the school play Ethan had mentioned during one of their conversations at the bakery, some production about the changing seasons where he played an autumn leaf. Maxwell checked his watch, calculating quickly. The elementary school was just a few blocks away. If he hurried, he might catch the end of the performance. The school parking lot was full when he arrived, parents' cars filling every available space. Maxwell parked on a side street and jogged to the entrance, hearing applause from within the gymnasium where the play was apparently being held. He slipped in through the back doors, finding himself in a crowded space filled with proud parents, many holding phones or cameras to record the performance. On the makeshift stage, a group of children dressed as various autumn elements, leaves, pumpkins, apples, sand-forest creatures were taking their bows. Maxwell spotted Ethan immediately, dressed as a brilliant red maple leaf, beaming with the pure joy of a child receiving applause. And there in the front row was Liv, clapping enthusiastically, her face radiant with maternal pride. Maxwell remained at the back, not wanting to disrupt the moment. As the children filed off the stage and parents began to collect their performers, he watched Liv embrace Ethan, kneeling down to his level to tell him something that made the boy's face light up even more. Frank Collins was there too. Maxwell noted, along with Walter and what appeared to be half the town, all part of the extended family that supported the Collins through life's performances, both literal and figurative. He waited until the crowd began to thin before approaching, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar nervousness. Ethan saw him first, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Max!" he shouted, breaking free from his mother's hand and running full tilt across the gymnasium floor. "You came back!" Maxwell knelt down just in time to receive the boy's enthusiastic hug, nearly knocked off balance by the force of it. "I promised I'd finish that dragon story, didn't I?" he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Over Ethan's shoulder, he saw Liv approaching more slowly, her expression a complex mixture of surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope. "You were an excellent autumn leaf," Maxwell told Ethan, who beamed at the compliment. "Did you see my solo part, where I twirled in the wind and sang about letting go?" The boy demonstrated the twirl right there in the emptying gymnasium. "I just caught the end," Maxwell admitted, "but I'd love to hear the song." Ethan immediately launched into a slightly off-key rendition about autumn leaves releasing their branches and dancing on the wind, complete with dramatic hand gestures. By the time he finished, Liv had reached them, standing a careful distance away, her arms crossed protectively across her chest. "That was beautiful, sweetie," she told her son. "Why don't you go show Grandpa your art project from the display in the hallway? I need to talk to Mr. Reed for a minute." Ethan looked between them, his young face suddenly serious. "You're not leaving again right away, are you?" he asked Maxwell directly. "Not right away," Maxwell promised, meeting the boy's amber gaze. This seemed to satisfy Ethan, who darted off to find his grandfather, leaving the adults in an island of awkward silence amidst the dispersing crowd. "You're back." Liv stated the obvious, her tone giving nothing away. "I am," Maxwell confirmed. "For how long this time?" It was a fair question, one Maxwell had asked himself repeatedly during the drive north. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." Chapter 7. Hard Truths. Liv's expression remained guarded, her amber eyes studying him as if trying to decode a complex puzzle. Around them, parents and children continued to exit the gymnasium, a few casting curious glances their way. "This isn't the place," she said finally. "Ethan will be back any second and half the town is watching." As if on cue, Walter appeared at the edge of their conversation bubble, his weathered face split with a knowing grin. "Well, well, the prodigal New Yorker returns," he commented, not bothering to hide his interest in the unfolding drama. "Walter," Liv said with a pointed look, "could you take Ethan for ice cream? Tell him I'll meet him at Harvey's in half an hour." The old man's eyes twinkled with undisguised delight at being included in the intrigue. "Consider it done." He offered Maxwell a small salute before shuffling off to intercept Ethan and Frank. Once they were relatively alone in the emptying gymnasium, Liv turned back to Maxwell. "You left in the middle of the night for an emergency board meeting. Now you're back less than 24 hours later. What happened? Deal fall through? Private jet mechanical issues?" There was an edge to her voice that Maxwell knew he deserved. "The Jenkins acquisition is back on track. The board is satisfied, and I left my executive team handling the follow-up," he replied honestly. "I drove back because I realized something important." "And what's that?" Maxwell took a deep breath. "That I've spent the last 15 years building a life that looks perfect on paper, but feels empty in reality. That somewhere along the way, I stopped living and started existing. That 10 days in Mapleton gave me more genuine joy than 10 years in Manhattan." Liv's expression softened slightly, but her practical nature wasn't so easily swayed by pretty declarations. "Those are nice words, Maxwell. But you still have a company to run, responsibilities, a life that you built. You can't just walk away because you enjoyed a small-town vacation." "I'm not suggesting walking away," Maxwell countered. "I'm talking about finding balance, about making room for what actually matters." "And what matters?" Liv challenged. "Right now, right this moment." Maxwell held her gaze steadily. "You, Ethan. The possibility of something real, something that doesn't revolve around quarterly reports and stock valuations." A teacher, clearing away programs from the seats nearby, gave them a curious look, and Liv shook her head slightly. "Let's walk," she suggested, leading the way out of the gymnasium and into the cool evening air. They walked in silence for a block, the tension between them almost palpable. Children's laughter echoed from the direction of the town square, where most of the post-play celebrations seemed to be happening. "You left without saying goodbye to him," Liv said finally, her voice quieter now but no less intense. "Do you have any idea what that would have done to Ethan if you hadn't come back? He's already dealing with one father figure who comes and goes when it's convenient." The comparison to Jason stung, but Maxwell recognized the validity of her concern. "You're right," he admitted. "I handled it poorly. I was caught off guard by the crisis, operating on autopilot." "It's not an excuse, just an explanation." Liv seemed surprised by his candid acknowledgement. "So what now? You're here for another week of small-town charm before real life calls you back again." They reached the town square, where several families from the play were gathered near the ice cream shop. Through the window, Maxwell could see Ethan animatedly telling Walter something, his hands gesturing excitedly, likely recounting his performance. "I'm proposing something different," Maxwell said, stopping at the edge of the square, turning to face Liv directly. "I'd like to stay at least part-time to see where this might go." "Between us," Liv's eyebrows rose. "Part-time? You mean weekends in Mapleton, when you're not busy with billion-dollar deals?" "Initially, yes," Maxwell acknowledged. "I can't simply abandon my company overnight. There are thousands of employees who depend on Reed Innovations for their livelihoods. But I can restructure, delegate, create space for something beyond work." "And what happens when Ethan gets attached, and then you realize that weekend trips to Vermont don't fit with your Manhattan lifestyle?" Liv asked, the protective mother evident in every word. "What happens when the novelty wears off?" Maxwell recognized the fear behind her questions, the fear of allowing someone into their lives only to have that person leave, as Jason had done. "This isn't about novelty," he said quietly. "This is about finding what I didn't even know I was missing." A flicker of something, hope perhaps, or at least willingness to listen, crossed Liv's face. "And what's that exactly?" "Connection. Purpose beyond profit. The feeling I get helping your father with the heavy lifting at the bakery. The way Ethan looks at me when I explain something he's curious about. The way you challenge me to be better, more honest, more present." Maxwell took a step closer, his voice dropping. "The way I feel when I'm with you, Liv." She swallowed visibly, her composure wavering. "Pretty words from a man who makes his living with persuasive pitches." "Not a pitch," Maxwell insisted. "Just the truth. The most honest thing I've said in years." Before Liv could respond, the door to the ice cream shop opened and Ethan burst out, Walter following more sedately behind him. The boy spotted them and raced over, ice cream smeared around his mouth. "Mom! Max is going to stay for dinner, right? And finish the dragon story? And maybe he can come to my soccer game tomorrow? I'm playing center forward and coach says I might even score a goal." The stream of hopeful questions highlighted exactly what was at stake, a child's heart, already investing in a connection that had no guarantees. Liv shot Maxwell a pointed look that clearly said, "See what I mean? "Sweetheart, Mr. Reed and I are still talking," Liv said gently. "Why don't you finish your ice cream with Grandpa and Walter?" Ethan's face fell slightly, his perceptiveness catching the tension between the adults. "Are you mad at Max for leaving?" he asked his mother directly. "Because he came back. And he said he was going to finish the dragon story." Liv crouched down to her son's eye level. "I'm not mad, honey. We're just having a grown-up conversation about complicated things. Like when you and Dad talk about schedules and commitments," Ethan asked, making air quotes around the words with sticky fingers. Liv winced slightly, and Maxwell felt a pang of empathy for the complexities she navigated as a single mother. "Something like that," she confirmed. "Now please give us a few more minutes." Ethan sighed dramatically, but trudged back toward Walter and Frank, casting glances over his shoulder as he went. When he was out of earshot, Liv straightened and faced Maxwell again. "That's what I'm trying to protect," she said quietly. "He's already dealing with one part-time parent. I won't set him up for more disappointment." "I understand," Maxwell said, and he truly did. "What if we take it slowly? No promises to Ethan, no commitments until we figure out if this is viable." "Figure what out exactly?" Liv pressed. "What this are you referring to?" It was the moment of truth, the question that demanded absolute clarity. Maxwell took a deep breath. "My feelings for you, Liv, and whatever you might feel for me, if anything. The possibility that we could build something meaningful together." Liv's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected such direct acknowledgement. "Maxwell. Max," he corrected gently. "The man who races down hills and gets grass stains on his designer jeans. The man who helps with the heavy lifting and reads dragon stories. That's who I am when I'm with you and Ethan. That's who I want to be more often." A complicated series of emotions passed across Liv's face. Doubt, hope, fear, and something warmer that gave Maxwell courage. "I can't deny there's something here," she admitted reluctantly. "But we live in different worlds with different values, different priorities. You run a tech empire. I run a small-town bakery and raise my son. Worlds can intersect," Maxwell suggested. "Bridges can be built, if both sides want it enough." Liv glanced toward the ice cream shop where Ethan was watching them intently while Walter distracted him with exaggerated stories. "It's not just about what I want," she said softly. "It's about what's best for him." "I know," Maxwell acknowledged. "And I would never ask you to risk his happiness on a whim. All I'm asking for is a chance to show you, both of you, that this could work." Liv was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words, considering possibilities and risks. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Dinner," she said. "You can stay for dinner tonight, finish the dragon story. But we keep things unfriendly. Nothing more until we see if this part-time arrangement is even sustainable." It wasn't everything Maxwell had hoped for, but it was a beginning, an open door rather than a closed one. "I accept those terms," he said, unable to suppress a small smile. "Don't look so pleased with yourself," Liv warned, though a reluctant smile tugged at her own lips. "I haven't agreed to anything beyond lasagna and fictional dragons." "Lasagna is an excellent start," Maxwell assured her solemnly. "I happen to consider it a cornerstone of any solid relationship." This earned him a genuine laugh, the tension between them easing slightly. "Come on," Liv said, nodding toward the ice cream shop. "Let's put Ethan out of his misery. He's practically vibrating with anticipation over there." The boy's face lit up when they approached together, immediately launching into a detailed description of his upcoming soccer game and why Maxwell absolutely had to attend. Liv didn't contradict him, simply exchanged a meaningful look with Maxwell that acknowledged the complexity of their situation. Dinner at the Collins home that evening was a lively affair, with Ethan dominating the conversation, eager to fill Maxwell in on everything that had happened during his brief absence. Liv moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing a lasagna that rivaled Lucia's while maintaining a certain careful distance from Maxwell, physical and emotional. Frank Collins joined them, his initial wariness toward the returning New Yorker gradually thawing as the meal progressed. By dessert, apple crumble with vanilla ice cream, he was sharing stories of the bakery's early days, when his father had run the place with an iron fist, and recipes were guarded more carefully than bank vaults. After dinner, Maxwell kept his promise to continue the dragon story, with Ethan hanging on every word, occasionally interjecting with questions or predictions about the plot. From the doorway, Liv watched them, her expression unreadable but her eyes never leaving Maxwell's face as he brought the characters to life. When Ethan finally drifted off to sleep, Maxwell carefully closed the book and tiptoed from the room, finding Liv waiting in the hallway. "Thank you for that," she said quietly as they descended the stairs. "He's been talking about that story non-stop since you left." "I enjoyed it as much as he did," Maxwell replied honestly. In the corporate world, he was valued for his strategic mind, his business acumen, his ability to identify profitable opportunities. No one there cared about his talent for dragon voices or his patience with a child's interruptions. In the living room, Frank had fallen asleep in his armchair, a baseball game playing softly on the television. Liv turned down the volume and gestured for Maxwell to follow her to the kitchen. "Coffee?" she offered, already filling the kettle. "Please." They moved around the kitchen in a strangely comfortable domestic dance. Liv preparing the coffee while Maxwell cleared the last of the dinner dishes, loading them into the dishwasher with more care than he'd ever shown his own high-end appliances in Manhattan. When they were seated at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between them, Liv finally broached the subject they'd been circling all evening. "How would this work exactly? This part-time arrangement you're proposing?" Maxwell had been considering this very question during his drive from New York. "Initially, I'd come up for long weekends, Thursday to Monday. I can work remotely for some of that time, handle the most pressing business matters without being physically present in New York." Liv nodded slowly, considering. "And your company? Won't the board have something to say about their CEO suddenly becoming part-time?" "I've been thinking about restructuring for a while," Maxwell admitted. "Promoting Lawrence to Chief Operating Officer, delegating more day-to-day responsibilities. This situation just accelerates the timeline, and eventually—" "What's the end goal here?" Liv's direct gaze demanded honesty. Maxwell took a deep breath. "Eventually, I'd like to find a more permanent balance, perhaps splitting my time equally between New York and Mapleton, with the goal of spending more time here as the company transitions to new leadership." "You'd give up being CEO?" Liv sounded skeptical. "After everything you've built?" "Not immediately," Maxwell clarified. "But eventually, yes. The company has been my life for so long that I never stopped to question whether it should remain my entire life. These past 2 weeks have shown me that there's more, or there could be." Liv sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "And what would you do in Mapleton? Small-town life can seem charming for a visit, but the reality is different. We don't have 5-star restaurants or Broadway shows or the constant stimulation of city life." "I've noticed," Maxwell said with a small smile. "And yet I've been more content sitting on Walter's dock watching ducks than I have been at charity galas with celebrities and politicians." "Novelty," Liv suggested, though without the edge her voice had held earlier. "The appeal of something different." "It might not last." "Maybe," Maxwell acknowledged, "but I'd like the chance to find out. As for what I do here, I have ideas. There's potential for technology education programs at the high school. The library renovation fund could use support, and—" He hesitated, then continued, "I've noticed the building next to the bakery has been vacant for a while." Liv's eyebrows rose. "The old hardware store. Mr. Peterson closed it when he retired last year. No one's been able to make the numbers work to take it over." "It would make an excellent expansion space," Maxwell suggested carefully, "for Colin's Bakery. I've heard you mention wanting to offer classes, perhaps a small cafe section with seating." Liv's expression immediately closed. "I'm not looking for an investor, Maxwell. The bakery has been family-owned and operated for generations. We've weathered tough times before without outside help." Maxwell recognized the pride that fueled her resistance, the same independence that had seen her through single motherhood, and the challenges of small business ownership. "Not an investor," he clarified. "A partner, possibly, eventually, if things between us developed in that direction." The implication hung in the air between them, potent with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. Liv stared into her coffee cup, as if it might contain answers to questions she hadn't even formulated yet. "You're moving very fast," she said finally, looking up to meet his gaze. "From Manhattan CEO to potential small-town baker in the span of 2 weeks. When you know, Maxwell said simply. "I've made billion-dollar decisions on less certainty than I feel about this." Liv shook her head, but there was a reluctant smile playing at her lips. "This isn't a business acquisition, Max. People are messy, complicated. Feelings change. Circumstances intervene." "All true," he acknowledged. "Which is why I'm proposing we start small. Weekends, friendship, building something gradual and sustainable." The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 10, startling them both with a reminder of passing time. Liv glanced toward the doorway, where her father still slumbered in his armchair, then back to Maxwell. "You should go," she said, though her tone held regret rather than dismissal. "It's getting late, and tomorrow is a school day for Ethan, bakery day for me." Maxwell nodded, recognizing that they had covered enough emotional territory for one evening. "Nancy said my room at the inn is available whenever I need it. I called from the road to reserve it for the weekend." Liv's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pretty confident I'd agree to your proposal." "Hopeful," Maxwell corrected. "Not confident. I would have stayed regardless, even if just to attend Ethan's soccer game as promised." This earned him another small smile. "He's going to be impossible to manage now that you're back." "Fair warning." They rose from the table, carrying their empty mugs to the sink. In the confined space of the kitchen, they found themselves standing closer than they had all evening. Close enough that Maxwell could detect that subtle vanilla floral scent that had first caught his attention in the bakery. For a moment, neither moved, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Liv took a deliberate step back, maintaining the boundaries she'd established earlier. "Thursday to Monday?" she asked, her voice slightly huskier than before. "To start with," Maxwell confirmed, respecting her space while allowing his eyes to convey what he wasn't yet permitted to express physically. Liv nodded, a decision apparently reached. "Ethan's soccer game is tomorrow at 4. The team wears blue. I'm sure he'd like it if you cheered extra loud when he's on the field." It was acceptance, however tentative, of Maxwell's proposed arrangement. "I'll be there," he promised. Front row cheering inappropriately loud. Liv walked him to the door, their footsteps quiet to avoid waking Frank. On the porch, illuminated by the same soft light as their previous parting, the contrast could not have been more stark. Then, an abrupt separation tinged with hurt and resignation, now a careful beginning marked by cautious hope. "Good night." "Max from New York," Liv said softly, echoing their earlier goodbye with a warmth that had been absent before. "Good night." "Liv from Mapleton," Maxwell returned, adding with a small smile, "See you tomorrow." As he walked back toward the inn, Maxwell felt lighter than he had in years, despite the complexities of the path ahead. There would be challenges, reconciling his New York responsibilities with his growing attachment to Mapleton, navigating Liv's understandable caution, building trust with Ethan without creating expectations that might not be fulfilled. Yet for the first time in longer than he could remember, Maxwell Reed was facing the future not with strategic calculations or risk assessments, but with genuine hope. The night sky above Mapleton seemed to hold possibilities that had never been visible from his Manhattan penthouse, despite its supposedly superior view. His phone remained off in his pocket. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the repercussions of his abrupt departure from New York, to begin the process of restructuring both his company and his life. Tonight was for savoring the first step on a journey whose destination remained uncertain, but whose direction felt unmistakably right. Chapter 8. Building Bridges. The next 6 weeks established a rhythm that began to feel natural, even inevitable. True to his word, Maxwell spent Thursday through Monday in Mapleton, returning to New York for the first half of each week to handle business that couldn't be managed remotely. The Mustang made the journey between his two worlds, becoming as familiar with the route as he was. In New York, changes were underway at Reed Innovations. Lawrence had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, taking on many of the day-to-day responsibilities that had previously consumed Maxwell's time. Diana, after her initial shock at the new arrangement, had adapted with her usual efficiency, restructuring his schedule to maximize productivity during his New York days while protecting his Mapleton time. The board had been harder to convince. Several emergency meetings had been called, concerns raised about Maxwell's commitment, questions asked about his mental health. It took a presentation outlining the benefits of distributed leadership, alongside continued strong quarterly results, to finally ease their worries. The fact that Reed Innovation's stock price had actually risen following the announcement of the restructuring, interpreted by the market as a sign of organizational maturity, hadn't hurt either. In Mapleton, Maxwell's integration into community life continued steadily. He became a regular presence at the bakery, learning the basics of bread making from Frank, who seemed to enjoy having an apprentice despite his initial suspicions about the wealthy city man's intentions. Maxwell discovered a surprising satisfaction in the tactile process of kneading dough, the patience required for proper rising, The simple chemistry of transforming basic ingredients into something nourishing. Ethan's soccer team finished their season undefeated, due more to enthusiasm than skill, with Maxwell attending every home game and even traveling to a few away matches when his schedule allowed. The boys' delight in having a consistent male presence cheering from the sidelines was evident, though Maxwell was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, mindful of Liv's concerns about creating unsustainable expectations. His relationship with Liv evolved with careful deliberation, friendship deepening gradually into something more. They shared meals, conversations that stretched late into the evening after Ethan was asleep, walks around the lake where Walter pretended not to be keeping an eye on them from his fishing spot. Maxwell learned about Liv's dreams for the bakery, her concerns about providing Ethan with opportunities, her complicated relationship with the town that supported her, while sometimes suffocating her with well-intentioned involvement in her life. In turn, he shared more of himself than he had with anyone in years, his childhood in Detroit, watching his father work himself to exhaustion for minimal reward, his determination to create a different path, the loneliness that had accompanied his rise to success, the emptiness that had ultimately driven him to that impulsive late-night drive that brought him to Mapleton. The first kiss happened on a chilly November evening, walking back from Harvey's pub after their first official date, dinner without Ethan, Frank conveniently available to babysit. It was nothing like the calculated romantic encounters Maxwell had experienced in New York, with their expensive settings and practiced seductions. Instead, they had stopped on the footbridge over the small creek that ran through town, watching the moonlight reflect off the water, when Liv had turned to him with a directness that was entirely her own. "I think we should stop pretending we're just friends," she had said, her amber eyes holding his in the dim light. "Don't you?" Maxwell had responded not with words, but by closing the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt simultaneously like a beginning and a homecoming. When they had finally parted, both slightly breathless, Liv had smiled that small, crooked smile he'd grown to cherish. "Well," she had said simply, "that answers that question." Now 6 weeks after his return to Mapleton, Maxwell stood in Collins' bakery early on a Thursday morning, having arrived from New York late the previous night. The bakery wouldn't open for another hour, but inside the day's preparation was well underway. Frank shaped loaves with practiced hands despite his arthritis, while Liv checked the pastries rising in the proofer. "Morning," Maxwell called as he entered through the back door, carrying a tray of coffees from the new cafe that had opened on the edge of town. "Premium fuel for premium bakers." "Bless you," Liv said fervently, accepting a cup and inhaling the steam with closed eyes. The espresso machine chose today of all days to stop working. "I could take a look at it," Maxwell offered, setting Frank's coffee on the workbench beside him. "I do run a technology company after all," Liv laughed. "Somehow I doubt Reed Innovation specializes in 20-year-old espresso machines held together with hope and baking twine." "You'd be surprised what a good engineer can fix," Maxwell replied, leaning in to steal a quick kiss, mindful of Frank's presence just a few feet away. Their relationship was no secret, but Maxwell remained respectful of family boundaries. "If you want to be useful," Frank interjected, not looking up from his loaves. "There's a delivery of flour coming at 7. My back isn't up to shifting 50-pound sacks today." "Happy to help," Maxwell assured him, shrugging out of his cashmere coat and hanging it on the hook that had gradually become his over the past weeks. Beneath it he wore jeans and a simple sweater, his Manhattan suits remaining in his penthouse closet during his Mapleton days. As he rolled up his sleeves, preparing to check the malfunctioning espresso machine, the bell above the front door jingled unexpectedly. Liv frowned, glancing at the clock. "We don't open until 6, she called, moving toward the front of the bakery. "Sorry, but you'll need to come back in an hour." Maxwell heard a familiar voice respond, one that belonged in his New York life, not here in Mapleton. "I'm not here for bread, though it does smell amazing. I'm looking for Maxwell Reed." Stepping into the front of the bakery, Maxwell found Diana standing just inside the door, impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit that looked absurdly out of place among the rustic surroundings. Her expression was unreadable as she took in the scene, Maxwell in casual clothes with flour already dusting his hands, Liv in her bakery apron, Frank visible through the kitchen doorway. "Diana," Maxwell said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here?" His assistant straightened, professionalism masking whatever thoughts might be passing behind her carefully composed features. I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation that couldn't wait. The Jenkins merger has hit another snag, legal complications that require your immediate attention. The board is convening an emergency session at noon. The familiar tension of corporate crisis immediately settled across Maxwell's shoulders. What kind of legal complications? Diana glanced at Liv, clearly reluctant to discuss confidential business matters in front of strangers. Perhaps we could speak privately? Maxwell felt rather than saw Liv stiffen beside him. Liv Collins, she said, extending a flour-dusted hand. I'm the owner of this bakery. Diana Parker, his assistant replied, shaking Liv's hand with professional courtesy. Mr. Reed's executive assistant. Again, I apologize for interrupting your morning. No need to apologize, Liv said, her tone neutral but with an undercurrent Maxwell recognized as protective withdrawal. I'm sure Mr. Reed's business takes priority. The formality of Mr. Reed wasn't lost on Maxwell. Before he could address it, Diana continued. The jet is standing by at Burlington. If we leave within the hour, you'll make the board meeting. I just got here last night, Maxwell pointed out, already calculating the implications of an immediate return to New York. Ethan's disappointment. Liv's likely interpretation of yet another abrupt departure. The setback to the trust they'd been carefully building. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't critical, Diana replied. Jenkins is threatening to walk away completely. The entire acquisition could collapse, taking the Thompson and Westfield deals with it. The domino effect she described would indeed be devastating to Reed Innovations, potentially affecting thousands of employees and years of strategic positioning. Maxwell felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the weight of being the person ultimately accountable for the company's success or failure. Liv had retreated slightly, busying herself with rearranging already perfectly arranged pastries in the display case. Her back was rigid, her movements too controlled to be natural. Give me a moment. Please, Maxwell told Diana. Wait in the car. His assistant nodded, casting one more curious glance around the bakery before exiting. When the door closed behind her, Maxwell turned to Liv, who continued her unnecessary reorganization of pastries. Liv, he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. Don't, she said quietly. You need to go. I understand. But her tense posture and averted eyes told a different story. This isn't like last time, Maxwell insisted, moving closer. Yes, I need to handle this crisis, but I'll be back as soon as it's resolved. A day, maybe 2 at most. Liv finally looked at him, her amber eyes carefully guarded. Your real life is calling again, Maxwell? Say it always will. The reversion to his full name stung. This is also my real life, he said, gesturing to encompass the bakery, Mapleton her. These past weeks haven't been pretend. I know that, Liv acknowledged, her expression softening slightly. But this is the reality of what you're proposing. Emergencies that pull you away, priorities that will always compete with whatever this is becoming. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not angry. I'm just recognizing the pattern. Frank appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. Everything all right out here? Mr. Reed has an emergency back in New York, Liv explained, her voice carefully neutral. His assistant came to collect him. Frank's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed his concern, not for Maxwell's business crisis, but for his daughter's heart. I see, he said simply. Well, duty calls, I suppose. The phrase echoed Liv's words from their previous parting, a reminder of how they'd been here before. Maxwell felt frustration building. At the timing, at the circumstance that forced him to choose between responsibilities, at the wariness he saw in Liv's eyes just when they'd been building something promising. I'll call Ethan tonight to explain, he promised. And I'll be back by Saturday at the latest. This isn't me disappearing again, Liv. This is me handling a specific crisis and returning as soon as possible. Liv nodded, but the careful distance in her manner remained. You should go. Your assistant is waiting. And you have a jet standing by. There was no accusation in her tone, just a statement of fact, but the contrast between their worlds had never felt more pronounced. Maxwell hesitated, torn between the urgent need to address the business crisis and the equally pressing desire to reassure Liv that this departure didn't mean regression in their carefully cultivated relationship. Go, she said more softly. Just let us know when you know your plans. The us, her and Ethan, reminded Maxwell of exactly what was at stake, what he stood to lose if he handled this poorly. He stepped forward, gently taking her flour-dusted hands in his. I'm coming back, he said with quiet intensity. This isn't a choice between worlds anymore, Liv. I'm choosing both, finding balance. Sometimes that balance will tip one way or the other, but it doesn't change the underlying commitment. Something in his words or tone must have reached her, because Liv's expression warmed slightly. I believe you mean that, she said. Just remember that intentions and actions aren't always aligned. Maxwell squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. Watch me align them, he promised. Saturday at the latest. With a nod to Frank, who was watching the exchange with undisguised interest, Maxwell collected his coat and reluctantly left the warmth of Colin's bakery for the sleek black car where Diana waited. Engine running. The drive to Burlington passed in a blur of phone calls and briefing materials, Diana efficiently updating him on every aspect of the Jenkins crisis. The jet ride to New York was more of the same, Maxwell absorbing details, considering options, preparing for the battle ahead. By the time they landed at Teterboro, he was fully immersed in CEO mode. The transition from small-town baker's helper to corporate leader complete. The board meeting was as contentious as expected. Jenkins' legal team had discovered potential regulatory issues that threatened the entire acquisition structure. Maxwell led the discussion with the confidence that had built Reed Innovations into an industry leader, proposing alternative approaches, identifying compromises that might salvage the deal without sacrificing core objectives. By evening, a tentative path forward had been established, though it would require intense negotiation over the coming days. As the boardroom emptied, Lawrence lingered, watching Maxwell gather his notes. You've changed, his newly appointed COO observed without preamble. Maxwell looked up, surprised by the direct comment. How so? Lawrence considered the question, leaning against the polished conference table. 6 weeks ago, this crisis would have consumed you completely. You'd have been here until midnight, demanding answers, personally reviewing every document, probably sleeping on the office couch to be ready for the first call to Europe in the morning. It was an accurate assessment of his previous approach. And now? Now you're efficient, focused, decisive, but there's a boundary. I can see it. You're here, but not entirely here. Lawrence studied him with the insight of someone who'd worked closely with him for years. This Mapleton situation is real, isn't it? Not just a phase or a midlife crisis. Maxwell closed his portfolio, meeting his colleague's gaze directly. It's real. More real than anything has felt in a long time. Lawrence nodded slowly. The board is watching, you know. They're waiting for you to come to your senses, to remember that Reed Innovations is your life's work, your legacy. They'll be waiting a long time then, Maxwell replied without heat. Because I've discovered that a legacy isn't much comfort if you've sacrificed everything else to build it. A ghost of a smile crossed Lawrence's face. I never thought I'd see the day when Maxwell Reed prioritized personal happiness over corporate strategy. Neither did I, Maxwell admitted. But here we are. Here we are indeed. Lawrence straightened, adjusting his tie in a habitual gesture. For what it's worth, I think it suits you. This balance you're trying to find. You seem, I don't know, more human. It was perhaps the most personal observation Lawrence had ever offered in their 15 years of working together. Thank you, Maxwell said simply. Don't thank me yet, his COO replied with a grimace. We've still got a merger to salvage, and it's going to take more than one day of meetings. Jenkins's legal team is digging in their heels. Maxwell nodded, the weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders once more. Then we'd better get to work. But I'm back in Vermont by Saturday morning. Crisis resolved or not. Lawrence raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. I'll have the team prepare alternative proposals by morning. Divide and conquer. Divide and conquer, Maxwell agreed, grateful for the support of a leadership team that was stepping up to the new reality of shared responsibility. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal consultations and strategic adjustments. Maxwell worked with focused intensity, leveraging relationships he'd built over decades in the business world, finding creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems. Throughout it all, he maintained regular contact with Mapleton, text messages to Liv updating her on his progress, a FaceTime call with Ethan to explain his absence and hear about the boys' school project on dinosaurs. By Friday evening, the crisis had been largely resolved, not perfectly, but sufficiently to proceed with the acquisition under revised terms. The board was satisfied, Jenkins was mollified, and the company's strategic objectives remained intact. Maxwell sat in his penthouse, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond his windows, a glass of scotch untouched on the side table beside him. His phone displayed a text message he'd sent to Liv an hour earlier. Crisis contained. Flying back tomorrow morning. Should land in Burlington around 11. Miss you both. Her reply had been characteristically measured. Glad you resolved things. We'll be at the bakery until 2. Ethan has been making you a surprise. No explicit acknowledgement of missing him in return. No emotionally effusive response. Just practical information and a small hint that his absence had been noted. It was very Liv, and Maxwell found himself smiling at the screen, appreciating her straightforward nature all the more for having navigated the carefully choreographed interactions of corporate politics for the past 2 days. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Maxwell frowned, not expecting visitors. When he opened it, he found Diana standing there, a thick folder in her hands. "I thought you'd want the final Jenkins documents to review before Monday's signing," she explained, offering the folder. "Thank you," Maxwell said, accepting it. "But this could have waited until Monday." "It's nearly 9 on a Friday night, Diana. You should be starting your weekend." His assistant gave him a look that suggested his comment was slightly absurd. "It's never just been a job for either of us, has it?" she said, surprising him with the personal observation. "Reed Innovations has been our life for 15 years. The past tense wasn't lost on Maxwell. "Has been," he repeated thoughtfully. Diana hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic directness. "I saw it, you know. In Vermont. The bakery, the small town, the woman who looks at you like she's still deciding whether to trust you." A small, sad smile crossed her usually composed features. "I understand it now, why you've changed your entire life for this." Maxwell leaned against the doorframe, studying his assistant, the woman who had managed his professional existence with impeccable efficiency for over a decade, who knew more about his habits and preferences than anyone, yet whom he'd never really known as a person beyond her role. "It's not just about Liv and Ethan," he said carefully, "though they're a significant part of it. It's about remembering how to live, not just exist. It's about finding meaning beyond the next deal, the next acquisition, the next billion." Diana nodded slowly. "You know, when you first started this part-time arrangement, I thought it was temporary, a phase you needed to work through before returning to normal. I even had contingency plans for when you came to your senses. And now I think perhaps you found your senses, not lost them." She straightened, professional composure returning. "The jet is confirmed for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I've adjusted your schedule for next week to concentrate meetings on Tuesday through Thursday, with minimal commitments on Monday and Friday to maximize your time in Vermont." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement wasn't lost on Maxwell. "Thank you, Diana, not just for the schedule, but for understanding." She nodded once, then turned to leave before pausing. "She seems grounded, real, different from your usual type." "She is," Maxwell confirmed, not offended by the observation. His previous relationships had indeed followed a pattern. Ambitious women from his own world, connections based more on mutual benefit and compatibility on paper than genuine emotional connection. "Good," Diana said simply. "You need someone who sees Maxwell, not just Reed Innovations." With that surprisingly personal assessment, she departed, leaving Maxwell thoughtful in her wake. Early Saturday morning, Maxwell stood on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport, watching as his luggage was loaded onto the company jet. The past 48 hours had been a reminder of the world he'd built, its demands, its rewards, its limitations. He felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the weight of being Maxwell Reed, CEO and industry leader. Yet as the jet lifted off, carrying him back toward Vermont, toward Mapleton, toward the bakery where Ethan was preparing some surprise, and Liv was undoubtedly watching the clock with carefully guarded expectations, Maxwell felt something else too, the lightness of possibility, the freedom of a path being forged between worlds rather than confined to one. By the time the aircraft touched down in Burlington, Maxwell had shed the last vestiges of his New York persona, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the hypervigilant attention to his phone, the constant calculation of time against deliverables. As he retrieved the Mustang from long-term parking and headed toward Mapleton, he felt himself breathing more deeply, noticing the landscape, becoming present in a way that still felt like a rediscovery after years of distracted existence. Collins Bakery was busy when he arrived shortly after noon, the Saturday lunch crowd filling the small space with conversation and laughter. Through the window, he could see Liv behind the counter, efficiently serving customers while maintaining the genuine connections that made her beloved in the community. Frank was visible in the kitchen doorway, arranging fresh loaves in wicker baskets. And there was Ethan, proudly wearing a child-sized apron emblazoned with "Baker in Training," carefully arranging cookies on a display tray, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. For a moment, Maxwell simply watched them through the glass, this family that had somehow become central to his existence in the span of 2 months. Then he pushed open the door, triggering the small bell that announced a new customer. Ethan's head shot up, his face transforming with delight. "Max, you came back!" he shouted, abandoning his cookie duty to race around the counter. "You have to see what I made. Mom helped, but I did most of it myself." Liv looked up from serving a customer, her amber eyes meeting Maxwell's across the crowded bakery. For a breathless moment, he couldn't read her expression, the careful guard still in place. Then slowly, her lips curved into that small, crooked smile that had become his favorite sight in the world. "Welcome back," she mouthed silently, and Maxwell felt something settle inside him, a certainty that transcended the complications of balancing 2 worlds. He was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 9. The Heart's True Home. 6 months later, spring had transformed Mapleton. Cherry blossoms lined the town square, daffodils brightened front yards, and the lake sparkled under clear blue skies. The seasonal renewal mirrored the evolution in Maxwell's life. What had begun as an impulsive escape had rooted itself into something permanent and profound. The weekend arrangement had gradually expanded. Maxwell now spent only Tuesdays and Wednesdays in Manhattan, the rest of his week in Mapleton. The transition had been smoother than anticipated, with Lawrence proving himself more than capable of handling increased responsibility. The board had moved from skepticism to cautious acceptance as Reed Innovations continued to thrive under the new distributed leadership model. Maxwell stood at the counter of Collins Bakery, which had undergone its own transformation. The vacant building next door had indeed become an extension of the original space, not through Maxwell's investment, as he'd initially suggested, but through a community effort he'd helped organize. Local craftsmen had removed the dividing wall, contractors had updated plumbing and electrical systems, and volunteers had painted and decorated the expanded area, which now featured cafe tables, comfortable seating, and a small stage for community events. "Order up for Mrs. Henderson," Maxwell called, placing a bag containing a loaf of sourdough and 2 chocolate croissants on the counter. "And I've included a sample of our new cinnamon raisin bread. Frank's experimenting with the recipe." The elderly woman beamed as she collected her order. "Thank you, dear. It's so nice seeing a man your age taking such an interest in traditional crafts. My Harold always said working with your hands keeps your soul young." Maxwell smiled, no longer surprised by the easy familiarity with which Mapleton residents now treated him. What had begun as novelty, the big city CEO learning to knead dough and operate ancient bakery equipment, had evolved into genuine acceptance. He was no longer the New Yorker, but simply Max from the bakery, a transformation he treasured. Ethan burst through the bakery door, backpack bouncing, school day complete. "Is everything ready?" he asked breathlessly, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mom said today's the day." "Almost," Maxwell assured him, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Your mom's finishing up the paperwork now." The relationship between Maxwell and Ethan had deepened naturally over the months. Maxwell had been careful, as promised, not creating expectations he couldn't fulfill or overstepping boundaries. He was a consistent presence, attending school events, helping with homework, teaching the boy to fish with Walter's guidance, but always with an awareness of his position as Liv's partner, not a replacement for Ethan's father. Jason had made a brief appearance at Christmas, spending 2 awkward days in Mapleton before returning to his life in Boston. The visit had been difficult for Ethan, highlighting the contrast between his father's sporadic involvement and Maxwell's steady presence. Afterward, Liv and Maxwell had carefully navigated the complex emotions it stirred, ensuring Ethan understood that relationships could take different forms while remaining valid and important. The bell above the door jingled again as Liv entered from the side street, a folder tucked under her arm, her expression both nervous and elated. Frank emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from his hands, his weathered face creased with anticipation. "Well?" he asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Liv looked around at the 3 expectant faces before her, her father, her son, and the man who had impulsively driven into their lives on a stormy night and somehow become essential to them all. A slow smile spread across her face. "It's official," she announced, pulling a document from the folder. "The loan is approved. Collins Family Bakery and Cafe is now fully ours, mortgage and all." The significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. The bakery's expansion, while successful in terms of community support and increased business, had required substantial financial commitment. Liv had been determined to maintain family ownership, refusing Maxwell's repeated offers to invest directly. Instead, she had applied for a small business development loan, with the expanded operations promising performance as evidence of viability. "Congratulations," Maxwell said softly, the pride in his voice unmistakable. He had respected her independence while supporting her vision, offering business expertise without imposing his resources, a balance that had taken time and mutual understanding to achieve. Ethan bounced on his toes. "Does this mean we can finally tell everyone about the other surprise too?" Liv shot him a warning look, but her eyes danced with poorly suppressed excitement. "Ethan Collins, we talked about this." "But Mom," the boy protested, "you said once the bakery paperwork was finished, we could tell Grandpa and everyone else." Frank's eyebrows rose with interest. "Tell Grandpa what exactly?" Maxwell and Liv exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. After a moment, Liv nodded slightly, and Maxwell reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn velvet box. "I was going to wait until dinner tonight," he said, addressing Frank directly, but since Ethan's cat is out of the bag, he opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I've asked Liv to marry me, and she's agreed. With your blessing, of course." Frank Collins stared at the ring, then at his daughter, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, the stoic baker's eyes filled with tears. "Dad?" Liv moved to his side, concerned. Frank cleared his throat gruffly. "Just dust," he claimed unconvincingly. "Flour in my eyes." He clasped Maxwell's shoulder firmly. "You're a good man, Max Reed. Wasn't sure at first, but you've proven yourself. You have my blessing, for whatever that's worth in these modern times." "It's worth everything," Maxwell assured him sincerely. Ethan could contain himself no longer. "And the best part is, I get to be the best man and the ring-bearer," he announced triumphantly. "Max already asked me. We're going to wear matching suits and everything." The joy in the boy's voice reflected the careful, thoughtful way Maxwell had integrated himself into their family unit, respecting existing bonds while forming his own connections, never competing with Jason's place in Ethan's life, but creating his unique role. As word of the engagement spread through Mapleton with the efficiency of small-town communication networks, the bakery filled with well-wishers. Walter arrived with his thermos of spiked cider, insisting this occasion merited day drinking. Nancy from the inn brought a handmade card she'd apparently been keeping ready for this anticipated announcement. Lucia closed her restaurant early to deliver an impromptu engagement cake. Throughout the celebration, Maxwell observed Liv in her element, accepting congratulations with graceful humility, deflecting excessive attention, maintaining the practical outlook that characterized her approach to life. The amber eyes that had first captured his attention now held a contentment he treasured, knowing he had contributed to it without being its sole source. Later that evening, after Ethan had finally succumbed to sleep despite his excitement, Maxwell and Liv sat on the porch swing of what was now their shared home. The ring glinted on her finger as she absently traced patterns on his palm. "Second thoughts?" he asked softly, noting her pensive expression. Liv shook her head, leaning into his shoulder. "The opposite. I was just thinking about the night you left suddenly. When Diana arrived with the Jenkins crisis, I was so sure that was it, that your real life had reclaimed you. And now? Now I understand there was never a real life versus fake life, just different parts of one whole." She looked up at him, her expression open in the way that had taken months of trust-building to achieve. "The Maxwell Reed who runs board meetings and the Maxie, who helps Ethan with science projects and kneads dough with my father, they're the same person. I just needed to see that integration was possible." Maxwell tightened his arm around her, profoundly moved by her understanding. "It hasn't been easy," he acknowledged. "There are still days when the balance tilts too far one way or the other." "That's life," Liv replied practically. "Perfect balance exists only in physics textbooks, not in real relationships." The wisdom in her words struck Maxwell anew. This woman had taught him more about authentic living in 80 months than he'd learned in decades of corporate achievement. "There is one more thing we need to discuss," Liv continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. The Reed Foundation's offer to fund the library renovation. It was a topic they'd carefully avoided during the engagement announcement. 2 weeks earlier, the Reed Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Maxwell's corporate empire, had proposed funding the complete renovation of Mapleton's aging library, a project the town had been fundraising toward for years with limited success. The offer had created complex ripples in the community and in their relationship. Some townspeople welcomed the generosity. Others worried about outside influence changing Mapleton's character. For Liv, it represented the lingering tension between maintaining the town's self-sufficiency and accepting help that could genuinely benefit the community. The Foundation's offer stands, Maxwell said carefully, but it comes with no strings, no naming rights, no corporate branding. Just support for a community that's given me more than I could ever repay. Liv was quiet for a moment, considering. I spoke with the library board today, after finalizing the bakery loan. They've decided to accept the offer, with some conditions. Local contractors must be used where possible. The historical character must be preserved, and there will be a new community room named after Mrs. Abernathy, who's been the librarian for 40 years. Maxwell nodded, understanding the importance of these conditions. I'll have Diana draw up the revised agreement immediately. Thank you, Liv said softly, for understanding why this was complicated for me, for all of us. Mapleton doesn't need saving by some wealthy outsider, Maxwell acknowledged, but sometimes communities and individuals can help each other grow. It took me leaving Manhattan to learn that genuine connection isn't a transaction with winners and losers. It's mutual support that makes everyone stronger. Liv's smile in the porch light contained all the warmth and complexity that had drawn him to her from their first meeting. Pretty wise for a city boy, she teased gently. I had an excellent teacher, Maxwell replied, drawing her closer as night settled over Mapleton, stars emerging in a sky clearer and more vibrant than any he'd ever seen from his penthouse view. In the distance, the town square glowed softly with lamplights. Beyond it stood Collins Bakery, its expanded space a testament to community effort and shared vision. And here on this porch in this moment, Maxwell Reed, CEO, baker's helper, mentor to an energetic boy, partner to a remarkable woman, found himself exactly where he belonged. Not in Manhattan, not in Mapleton, but in the space he'd created between worlds, a life built on connections rather than acquisitions, on presence rather than performance, on love rather than achievement. It had taken a wrong turn on a stormy night, the scent of fresh bread and amber eyes that saw through pretense to lead him here. As Maxwell held Liv close under the Vermont stars, he silently thanked whatever force of fate or chance had guided his Mustang toward Mapleton, toward home.